Daddy was so bad to me.
So we start the episode with the same title sequence as the specials, but with some minute differences. No dramatic zoom in as the Tardis whizzes across a different yet beautiful section of space, and different effects on the diamond logo. We pick back up with a little rerun of the last part of Church on Ruby Road, but with no Mrs. Flood, and the Doctor invites Ruby inside. She does the whole asking things quite well, and the Doctor comes up with some different answers to the more generic questions. And considering he actually answers them, unlike 13, who avoided explaining as much as she could to her friends, we can see the creativity in the dialogue, but that doesn't mean it's perfect. 15 mentions the Rani, meaning she is totally coming back, I swear guys, and says conquistador really strangely.
The Rani? The Conquistador?
15 is pretty open about everything from his name to the chameleon circuit and to Gallifrey's redestruction. Ugh. But this scene works pretty well. It's the next scene where we're introduced to the fun and more light-hearted tone. The scene after the Doctor talks about his people's genocide. And while I appreciate the comedy working well with the bouncy score and the lead performers, not all of it lands. Meaning that when it doesn't land, it really doesn't land. Ruby is a little out of her depth, but eventually works up the courage to go outside into the past, giving us this great view. And this is a real harbinger of the great visuals to come. Ruby steps on a butterfly and in doing so changes into a different species that threatens to kill the Doctor. And while I love the look and the joke is edited differently to its preview that felt a bit stilted, it does feel a little shoehorned. But I'm sure there is an audience who it'll land for, just not me. The kinda plot holiness of the joke is fixed with a nice comedic offhand line, and with some help from Ruby they enthusiastically go through the vortex into the future. And while I love the new style of materialization, the fading in's still there, but showing the velocity and speed the TARDIS comes in with. I think I prefer previous shots of within the vortex to these. I like the colours here, a new unique colour scheme. As the first Russell era had the blue and red green, the Moffat era was reluctant to show the vortex within the episodes, and the Whittaker one, while not shown often, was a visual spectacle. This is kinda disappointing, as the TARDIS just skims along the bottom like a stone thrown against the water, or a depressed skateboard going up and down the sides of a bowl. They arrive on a space station, and with a strange confirmation of the reality of Star Trek, they investigate as the station is clearly falling apart, with some nice synergy.
No, you made it worse.
And they are creeped upon by the Boogeyman. And considering this monster is meant to be super duper scary, literally inducing fear in those that hear its roar, it's a little silly. They used creative camera angles and shots to obscure the creature, and make it more unknown until the latter portion of the episode, which really helps add fear factor, but with its spindly little fingers and slightly clumsy walk and dog bark at the end, it comes across more like a low-budget, straight-to-VHS 80s horror movie monster, just without Red Letter Media laughing at it.
What are you even laughing at? The background?
No, the things that are wrong with her.
What?
All the things wrong with her. The crying moment.
With some good lines, they're sent running, as we get some strange but effective shots from the CCTV, and while the editing is a little epileptic, it does enhance the visual storytelling. They hop in a little elevator up to safety as the Doctor analyses his own fear response, and he keeps saying,
Yet again, push the button.
in this episode, so I think I'm missing some sort of gag. They find a baby farm, also called a Genesis machine, made to, of course, grow babies for world colonization.
What? Food? They're not tomatoes.
Oh, excuse me, there's a big hungry thing downstairs.
15 pulls an end of the world and shows Ruby her first vista of open space. And to be fair, it looks pretty good. I'd be as impressed as Ruby. It's now she realises he is alone, and he introduces her to his way of life with a decent speech. Also pulling from End of the World, going so far as to explain the whole phoning other times thing, and explaining the translation circuit with some nice dialogue. And while I will compare this to exactly the same way these things were introduced in the End of the World back in Series 1, this is supposed to be accessible for newer audiences, and some new things are done with it, like giving us a visual aid for the translation, even with another mention of Mavity. Ruby calls Carla a little after she left in the church on Ruby Road, and the two adventurers are beset upon by a baby controlling a motorised pram. And while not every shot of these babies lands, it's a pretty good effect, at least comparing to big babies.
You're a couple of guys hanging out by the flowers. Don't say you just got there, you've been there for hours.
But seriously, it works quite well, and both the performances and dialogue seem to hit the mix between baby and higher intelligence quite well. The first baby they meet is one of the main two, Sammy Amber and Mason McCumsky as Eric, who, while attempting to analyse the building pressure of the station, comes across our travellers, confusing them for their mummy and daddy. He excitedly leads them back to the other intelligent babies, who the Doctor calls babies, but keeps correcting himself to space babies, which I find kind of strange. Like he's correcting someone for getting the name of the episode wrong. So, episode 1, it's called Babies? No.
Space babies!
The set is nice, both in the halls, with colourful drawings on the walls at baby height, and with creative devices in the main hub to help the babies use the controls of the station. It's here we meet the captain baby, Poppy, played by Shola Olaitan Ajiboye, and Sienna Robin Mavanga Phipps. Wow, those are two very long names. The whole scene of the babies explaining their jobs and the Doctor and Ruby reacting are all quite whimsical, even when they have to unfortunately tell them they aren't their mummy and daddy. Ruby entertains most of the babies, who have never had hugs before, which feels like a hate crime. And we get info as the Doctor analyses the systems, as the adults left, and he gets to flex his emotional chops this episode. Even when the writing doesn't land, but that comes later, as now he tells the Timeless Child backstory to Poppy, setting up the moral of this episode. Everyone is unique, we're all different, but that's where we find our strength. A pretty good message, unless you're a raving cannibal. As I'll say later on, I had issues with this message interweaving into the plot, as I don't think it was integrated quite well. We get introduced to the supposed automatic AI, Nan-E, like Wall-E, who looks after the kids, including synchronised nose-blowing. And we get to know the monster from the baby's point of view, the Boogeyman, which Ruby discredits, leading the Doctor to traumatise and laugh at the babies. The Doctor is personally called away by Nanny, who isn't all that she seems, and wants him to go to a certain area.
Access portal 357.
Yeah, it is just a storage unit. What would I need to go there for?
Oh, for God's sakes! 357, come on!
Him and Ruby go there, and they have a little moment, drawing connections between the babies and Ruby's story, leading to some sort of psychic phenomena, including summoning the snow from the church, and giving the Doctor a different vision of what happened there, where Ruby's mum turns and points at the Doctor, once again supposedly sliding into the season arc. They're brought from their moment by Nanny, who turns out to be a member of the crew, Jocelyn, played by Golda Rochevelle, who's been looking after the babies, and we see videos of the other members of staff leaving, but disagreeing with having to leave. A decision made by the company to save money, but legally not being allowed to stop the station's baby machine. Things are going wrong, so the Doctor plugs in his sonic screwdriver, to recalibrate the main systems. Jocelyn gives a pretty good performance, hiding away from the babies, scared of being too close, and either dying before the babies, or truly being left on her own when they die, but resigning herself to death for them, as they will eventually run out of resources, stuck in space, with the neighbouring refugee planet only taking people in, not going out to fetch them. Jocelyn doesn't know what the Boogeyman is either, not answering any of the Doctor's questions. But Ruby does have a theory, that everything in the station fits together. Babies, a nanny, mummy and daddy, and a Boogeyman. And of course, the hero to slay the monster, as Eric is now riding into battle, Jocelyn unable to corral him back. And the nanny filter is not used very well for comedic effect here, but it is used better later in the story. Ruby feels like it's her fault having told Eric the monster wasn't real, but the fear effect has stopped Eric in his tracks, sending Ruby and then the Doctor running after him, only to find an overturned pram. To save Eric, Ruby makes noise to draw the Boogeyman to them, turning out to not be so much of a good plan as the Doctor sniffs out the fear of Eric, finding him in a cupboard, and having to hide from the Boogeyman altogether. And this chase is probably where the editing of the monster is best used, as they try to calm Eric down and we get quick cuts and flashes of the hunting creature. They're almost found, but the other babies come in clutch using a makeshift flamethrower to scare the creature off, with a pretty good triumphant score. Eric returns to base with the other babies, something Ruby refuses to do, and they go the other way, straight to the lower computer interface. To Jocelyn and the babies, the boogeyman has been there as long as the babies have been alive, and the computer system is its base, slime and mucus everywhere, including in Ruby's hair, which is gross. And once we learn what it is, a pretty clever idea all things considered, the monster being made up of mucus from the babies, the computer being on the fritz, interpreting the idea of bogeymen coming after children as literal, growing and birthing the creature from the baby's waist. And I admit having the blowing of the noses earlier in the story for the reveal was pretty clever, but it's still gross to see Ruby showered in it. We also learn the fear is deliberate, it's raw, made to incite primal fear. We get a pretty useless and not as funny as it thinks it is scene where the doctor has to tell Ruby the slime in her hair is snot, not helped by sloppy chunks coming from the pipe for effect. The creature finds them, and Jocelyn finally has control of the systems, guiding them through the lower levels and eventually closing the bogeyman off in an airlock, as she's ready to suck it out into space to protect herself and, more importantly, the babies. Ruby and the Doctor are treating it as if it were just another baby, which could have been a good idea if the monster was just misunderstood and misinterpreted, but we get none of that, and there's no humanization of the monster, as the closest we got to interacting with it was a baby setting it on fire. So while I am in tune with the Doctor's emotions and Jocelyn's, as Ruby comforts her later, it just isn't a well done payoff to the story. But we do get a good action set piece as the Doctor has to jump into the airlock as he doesn't have the sonic, manually hitting the door controls to save the creature. And for some reason the babies are on the bogeyman's side now? With no explanation, I guess they were told the moral of the story. The story ends all happy as Jocelyn comes out to care for the babies face to face, over her fear, and the bogeyman is down below, still trapped in the airlock, making a dog howl. What a load of crap. And using the built-up chemicals from the baby waste, we get a clever fart and expletive joke, sending the ship towards the refugee planet. The story ends with a nice scene between the Doctor and Ruby, she accepting his offer to travel full-time and getting a Tardis key. And the scene between the two is pretty great. But the Doctor gives Ruby one single stipulation. He won't go back to the church. The possibility of the paradox of changing that event scaring him enough to refuse her. But he will take her back to her real mother, Carla, dropping the TARDIS into her kitchen, ruining the house once again. But the way they get there and the moral is beautiful from Ruby's point of view. The Doctor comes out to have Christmas with them, but inside the TARDIS we're given a cliffhanger as he analyses Ruby's DNA, and it starts snowing in the console room. So that was episode 1, Space Babies, and there was a lot good with it, but I did find myself a little underwhelmed considering the hype I had. The episode had a great but poorly executed moral, the boogeyman working well as the villain, but the connection of it being just like another one of the children was terrible. I get where they were going, and it might have worked, but the execution here left a lot to be desired. The acting otherwise was pretty good, Ruby and the Doctor both endearing, and even when the writing is a little off or the story arc is a little clearly forced, their performances really draw you into it, and the way the story used them to reintroduce a lot of plot elements for newer audiences, while obvious for long-time fans, were effective, and had bits of new creativity within them. The babies were a wacky concept, realised brilliantly. Sure, the CGI was a little uncanny valley, but to me it wasn't too distracting, and the way they can flip between intelligence and baby instinct was well done. And while not taking part in the final set piece much, they do get enough to do to feel like a real part of the story. Jocelyn was pretty much the same, performed and written well for the most part, and getting a good ending for the character. But the climax does confuse her a little, as I was really connected to her, while the story at large was telling me she was doing the wrong thing. So with the confused message, comedy that failed to land a fair amount of the time, unexplored and underdefined resolution, but with nice acting and enjoyable visuals, I'll give Space Babies by Russell T Davies a 6 out of 10. Not bad, but I feel we could do a lot better, suffering from a lot of the same problems the Star Beast had, but learning from those mistakes, if just a little bit, although unfortunately not having the nostalgia and star power to reach a higher rating. Next is another by Russell T Davies, as is like 75% of the season, but I enjoyed this episode a lot more than Space Babies. But that doesn't make it perfect. In 1925, Jeremy Lim plays musician Timothy Drake. Wow, I wonder if this episode also has a Bruce Wayne or a Dick Grayson. He's teaching Henry here the joys of piano, even making it an entertaining lesson attempting to appeal to the boy's morbid curiosity. He is informative on topics such as the titular Devils Chord, and is clearly a very good piano player. But as the piano's top slams closed, he is beckoned towards it by a knocking, and opening it, he lets free Jinx Monsoon's long-awaited musical villain, Maestro. Most of the practical and digital effects for Maestro themselves is pretty well done, and the performance from the low-key to the bombastic is pretty great. But it can't all be good, as there are some small times when Maestro grates on me, taking a joke or a bit too far, or when they do this voice. But overall, having them as like a mini toy maker, but for music, is a fantastic idea, and their screen presence is fantastic. Maestro mugs identifying as music, and considering the character is an extra-dimensional being, I'm pretty sure identifying as non-binary should make sense to at least the rational people, and it's handled much better than the gender conversation in the Star Beast, which was written like Russell turned into a vapid 18-year-old influencer.
Get away from him. Them.
What?
Me.
What?
I'm them.
You're who?
You're who?
You're assuming he as a pronoun.
2 magic words.
That sucks.
Henry is identified as Maestro's son, Henry Arbinger, or H. Arbinger, that Maestro promptly disappears. Maestro gets on with the evil doing, accompanied by a great score, and they rip the music from Timothy's soul, eating it, and leading us into the intro with a creative piano bit that slowly fades into the usual tune. These evil music note effects work well most of the time, but do have moments where they look unnatural and not in the good way. After the opening, we appear back in the Tardis, where Ruby asks to see the Beatles' first album recorded, that for some reason the Doctor seems unimpressed by initially, and then gets super excited, and we head back to one of the only years Doctor Who knows, 1963.
1963.
So in a nice transition, 15 and Ruby change to fit the period, and if you look closely later on, this includes a change of sonic colour. From blue to, without looking for a close-up, seems to be a bronzish red. We'll have to keep an eye out for that later in the series, but it's fun to have multiple colours crop up. They arrive at the album cover part of Abbey Road, you know the one, and their outfits are pretty cool. But there's no way, I believe, even in the 60s, that they can stand in the middle of the road for that long without getting worried. They go into Abbey Road Studios, not yet named that, and hijack a trolley lady's job with some impressive bullshitting from Ruby. So they go from studio to studio, and them along with me are very disappointed by the music being played, as everything seems droll without passion or creativity. They check in with the Beatles, who someone like me that there's nothing but their songs finds accurate in the casting and well used in the story. They meet Cilla Black, who seems just as droll as the others, and the same happens with an ensemble. It's sort of depressing and really bends 15 out of shape. They're quite sad that the Beatles have gone dull, and unfortunately they aren't far enough along to blame it on Yoko Ono.
That's enough of that.
They are given their tea for apparent exorbitant prices, and hold on a moment, is that Susan Twist again? Seriously, this woman's been cropping up pretty consistently. Miss Merridew in Wild Blue Yonder, the Galditi lady in the church on Ruby Road.
Can you do Galditi?
And apparently one of the leaving crew members in the last episode. Probably another series arc, but with much more subtlety and surprise than Ruby's. Quite well implemented. And I can't wait to see where it goes for the finale. Perhaps she is splintered back through time like Clara, or is some sort of immortal, who knows. We get a mention of Aeolian tones, and are shown that the past is changing due to the lack of music. So Ruby talks with John while the Doctor speaks with Paul, both played respectively by Chris Mason and George Capel. The Doctor figures out that a while ago music started getting old, and it's more of a job to scrape by now. And we get this beautiful dialogue where Paul speaks about how beautiful music could be. And John is much the same, but Paul gets to foreshadow how to defeat Maestro later on. And as he finally gets a decent emotive tune out, we see Maestro mugging in all the reflections. Like I was saying, the silliness getting a little bit too far. Paul and John are angered and disgusted, so leave, probably under Maestro's influence. And to test what's going on, with some nice dialogue between 15 and Ruby, they have a piano installed on the roof, and the Doctor gives us a rundown of the beginning of an unearthly child. You know, with Susan, the one who waited for him to come back, like Susan Twist, like a future character apparently being called Susan Triad. Jesus, there are a lot of theories going on about this season. A quick maid of the Doctor delivers the piano, and 15 gets Ruby to play. A nice through line considering we watched her play in the church on Ruby Road. And we get to hear a great piece that Ruby apparently came up with when her friend Trudy got heartbroken. Trudy is an interesting character considering she appeared in 2 scenes. Every Twitter ass that I could find immediately bashed the episode for having a trans person just based on her looks, and I found that immediate response hilarious for a character with like 3 lines, so I said we should give her a Big Finish spin-off. But I think it would be interesting if we get to see more of Ruby's friends. Maybe letting them get caught up in an adventure or something. Ruby's beautiful song is nice enough for the episode to have a break and give us a listen, and it clearly inspires many extras around, including the lovely June Hudson, who was previously predominantly Romana's costumer, and has had a Universe role before. And the scene apart from this great cameo is pretty emotional as these people are finally gifted decent music to emote to. But the scene is stopped as Maestro knocks the piano from the inside, ruining the voyeur's days. As Maestro comes out, they laugh like the Toymakers giggle, which is a good idea, but then they literally play the laugh clip from the giggle, which felt a bit lazy. I feel the point could have come across with Jinx's best impression of the original laugh. The Doctor is pretty fucking worried about the implications the giggle has, hiding underground with Ruby as he tries to figure out a game plan. And Maestro pretty intimidatingly struts around looking for them, wanting to eat the songs from Ruby, the only person alive able to play. The Doctor eventually uses a clever setting on his sonic to deafen the nearby area, and this whole scene is basically silent, which is a pretty cool creative choice, as TV shows usually only do this for dramatic effect when someone is deafened or suffers a head injury. But by resonating a puddle with their magic tuning fork, sound is brought back by Maestro. They're ready to get back to it, but June starts playing, inspired by Ruby, and Maestro seems to be pissed off. Not that someone is keeping music from them, but that the music exists, which doesn't really fit the motives of the character that we've just learnt, or that we will learn later on. The scene starts wonderful, as June is clearly having fun, but is unfortunate as Maestro mugs her to death. Ruby is freaking out, but so is the Doctor, worried at the sheer power of one of the Toymaker's kind. An embodiment. And looking at what it took to beat Neil Patrick Harris, his worries are justified. The Doctor makes sure we know this is the payoff to the Legion's line from the giggle, and Ruby is sure that since she's from the future, they can beat Maestro. So they hop back to the present day to see what the future holds. And Ruby says her present time is June, so like 6 months after last episode. That's a lot of Big Finish and comic adventures to write about. So they pull the temptation of Sarah Jane Smith, and the world outside is ruined, pushed into nuclear winter by the lack of music. Ruby and the Doctor have a nice emotional moment, but are interrupted by Maestro, who changes the world around them, and they do introductions. It's now we get the reveal of who Maestro is. Child of the Celestial Toymaker. Wow, their family tree is getting pretty well fleshed out. The Toymaker, their sister Hecuba, the child Maestro, and the grandchild Harbinger. Maestro is a little pissed, but admits it was the absence of the Toymaker that is allowing them to go crazy now. Maestro is revealed to be, to music, what their father was to games, and their dream is to feed on all the unsung songs and revel in the Aeolian music of the dead earth, eventually getting strong enough to devour the Musica Universalis. So, is becoming a pretty big threat. Due to the rules these beings work off of, Maestro has to give away the game. There is a lost chord that summons and banishes them, meaning only a musical genius can find it. With a very imposing attack, Maestro plays what sounds like a rearrangement of a few themes to resonate with the Tardis, throwing it into a mess, leaving the only thing the Doctor can do to go back to Abbey Road. This episode starts to use some Dutch angles, learning from Thor's mistakes, as they only exist here to enhance the experience, not make you ill, and the Doctor needs to find the notes, so steals John's guitar, while Maestro steals Ruby, as the note effects look a little dodgy, so with a clever quip from the Doctor, he breaks out and follows, only to find Ruby captured. I like the way Maestro's musical bars end as if they have little hands, and Maestro disarms the Doctor. Maestro mentions Trudy, strangely,
Playing lovesick songs for heartbroken lesbians.
and sets to work extracting Ruby's song. But after a song that is apparently a cover, get it? Cover? Like a music cover? All they get is Carol of the Bells from Church on Ruby Road, freaking Maestro the fuck out, giving us the information that the one that waits, teased before, must have been involved. So now it's theorizing time. The one who waits is apparently a he, also known as the oldest one, and seems to be a massively powerful entity. So let's list a few options off. Fenric, he waits a pretty long time before every battle. The Trickster, very much on the level of the Toymaker, perhaps more powerful, as an agent of chaos with his own extra-dimensional brigade. Sutek waited a bloody long time and is massively powerful. Omega waited a long time, but is probably not on the table. Susan and the Pons waited a bloody long time for things, but that's probably not helpful. And then we've got Susan Twist popping up everywhere. Then again, Rob Ritchie mentioned the Chris Waits poster from this episode. That's a possibility. And we've got Mrs. Flood. What is it with mysterious older women in this era? Or Heisenberg is the one that knocks. Maybe they're related to the one who waits. Okay, maybe we can stop this and get back to the episode. Clearly this theorizing isn't getting us very far. Ruby gets dropped, but the Doctor has a plan to use the apparently famed piano in their presence to find the right chords to send Maestro back. This starts a music fight between the two. And while I appreciate the fantastic playing and the strange, possibly reversed shot, but considering this is as close as we have to a Doctor Who musical episode, I would have liked if some noticeable Doctor Who themes were interwoven into the tracks. But as it is still pretty great, I think it was just a smidge of a wasted opportunity, not a real critique. It becomes the Doctor and Ruby versus Maestro, but Maestro blinks first, allowing the Doctor to start sealing them away in a great and tense scene. But he loses the final note, allowing Maestro to blow the piano out of the room and absolutely smack the Doctor and Ruby around until they're locked inside instruments pretty horrifically. And meanwhile, very slowly while all that mess is going on, John and Paul find their love of music together, figuring out the last note together, looking at each other as if 100 different fanfiction authors wrote gay romance novels about the two. And they seal Maestro away, in the goofiest way possible, as the piano draws them back in by itself, with one final warning about the one who waits. And to end the episode, we get a goofy musical number. There's always a twist at the end. While it's a good one, with a lot of great aspects, I wasn't as invested as I wanted to be. Dancing and singing is top tier, and the fact the song does contain a twist, as the dance move, and a literal twist, as we see Harbinger is still around even with Maestro gone, are cleverly interwoven. So yeah, it's great, and I'm pretty sure we see Murray Gold doing the instrumental for a bit, and it's fun when the Beatles and Cilla Black get into it, but I just wasn't as into it as I wanted to be, which just sucks for me. But I hope the other watchers got everything you could out of it. I think maybe it would have been better if it somehow interwove into the plot, like they needed to do this big musical number to get music back on track. Or perhaps this musical number could have been what defeated the Maestro. Good music versus bad music, something along those lines. The episode ends pretty funnily as they dance across the Abbey Road crossing like it's a piano, and I guess this whole thing is the equivalent of the Toymaker's powers being left over for a while. But the episode properly ends as the Tardis doors play the last notes as the Doctor and Ruby leave. So, that was the Devil's Chord. And while once again there are problems, I love the episode much more than Space Babies. The musical aspect was used well, and while 2 of the 4 Beatles were shafted, it was nice to have them here, not only as window dressing, but technically the ones to defeat Maestro. And Maestro themselves, while not fantastic all the time, gives us a great time. The performance is mostly great, only with small gripes, and the power of the character is sold well. The connection to the Toymaker really adding here, and not feeling contrived, as one of my favourite villain tropes of Doctor Who is unknowable deity. The Doctor and Ruby were just as good in this story, but the Doctor gets more emotional range, higher highs and lower lows. And this time the story supported these performances, instead of confusing itself. So overall, it delivered on great concepts, the writing and acting came together better than last time, and the musical aspect and connection to the arc were integrated well. So I'll rate it as the best of the 2 episodes, but not quite as high as The Church on Ruby Road, at a 7.5 out of 10. Episode 3, Boom, by Stephen Moffat. And if you didn't read that it was written by Stephen Moffat, you'll know when you watch the episode.
Fish fingers and custard is my favourite.
But you know, at least most of these are woven into the story well. This is quite different from what Who's done in recent years. It takes very little, 3 sets, a couple of war props, and is mostly focused on the characters and the drama between them. But while pretty good, maybe the best of the season so far, it can't be perfect. So let's get into the episode and see if we can suss out the good from the bad. We start off with the cold open that gets a lot done in little time. We meet 2 soldiers, and while different from previous appearances, the nice mix of church and army in the outfit match what we're told later, that they're members of the Church of the Papal Mainframe, who cropped up a fair amount in the Moffat era, and split into multiple chapters. So thank God this isn't the Kavarian chapter, because they'd shoot the Doctor on sight. That'd be a bit of an anticlimax. And like the integration of this church, most of the references to Moffat's work fit in well in the story, as I said before. Sure, some of them are a bit obvious when you know it's specifically Moffat writing the episode. Just to heighten the stakes, Joe Anderson, playing currently blinded soldier John Francis Vater, is called by his daughter, Splice Allison Vater, played by Kaylin Springall. And they have a good dynamic for the little contact we see between them. Although the way he signs off to her,
kiss kiss,
is overused as an emotional beat later on. The 2 soldiers make their way through the battlefield, and through some pretty natural dialogue we can glean a couple points. That they don't see who they're fighting, there's a fog problem on the world, and that the ambulances, brought from Villengard, are going a little haywire, and go wherever they sense combat. While the ambulances are a little jank, and Susan Twist as the interface is a little flat, sometimes a little nonsensical, the sort of wordplay Moffat sometimes implements, such as Doctor meaning Great Warrior to some people, is used well here, giving the same uncomfortable feeling when these 2 speak about the ambulances being afraid. Back at base, Splice comes upon a friend, another soldier, Mundy Flynn, played by future companion Varada Sethu, speaking to her clear love interest, Canterbury James Oliphant, played by Bhav Joshi, attempting to change shifts with him, with some pretty well-masked explanatory dialogue on how the church's ranking system works, eventually tempting him with a look at her new hidden tattoo, but it's on another soldier. Cheeky. But the romantic tension is clear between them, even if it's not to Mundy. Now, Varada Sethu does a good job in the role this episode, but I do have a problem with her appearing here. It just frustrates me. In the commentary and interviews, Russell is saying, "Ooh, look here! How does this tie into her being in the next season? Wait and see." And his mystery boxes are getting bloody ridiculous. Since the giggle, we've gotten the Master's Tooth, the one who waits, Susan Twist and Triad, Ruby's origin, and now Varada being here for some reason. Enough is enough. I swear, if another mystery box is introduced next episode, I'm going to England, hunting Russell down, and launching a brick into his car at 73 miles an hour. The soldiers are making headway, but the one who can keep his eyes open, Carson, falls down a hill into a landmine, showing us in pretty brutal detail how they work, as he is immediately exploded. John is captured by the ambulance and is brutally terminated since his eyesight makes him a liability in the battle. And although the ambulance is shot creatively, all jagged and unsteady, seemingly emulating John's eyesight, it is a little distracting. He knows what's going to happen, so leaves a final message.
Kiss kiss.
And while uttering a phrase many Australians have come to hate, the ambulance executes him.
You from the media, tell the Prime Minister to go and get from Nelligan. We really enjoy doing this, head.
We cut over to the Doctor with a nice shot who hears John's screams and tells Ruby to hang behind while he runs into the smoky battlefield, managing to see the ambulance but land himself on the mine, running into the credits. I like the way his heroic theme cuts as soon as he steps on the landmine, being changed for some tense ambiance, but that's immediately ruined by the credits starting. They had a good idea, they just paved over it. Ruby exits the Tardis to hear the Doctor singing and calls his name a bunch, finding him in the pit, on the mine, while he sings the Skyboat song to keep himself calm, as any disturbance could set the mine off. The lights on the mine giving us a pretty clear, if a little janky meter. Sure, it helps build tension, but there are movements where you feel like it shouldn't advance as far as it does, or you're left wondering why it isn't advancing at that time. The dialogue between Ruby and the Doctor as they figure out the situation and try to stay calm is pretty well done, and acted greatly. The tight shots of the two really helping to keep the audience invested while they talk, since a lot of the first half of the story is just that, talking. 15 are some choice words, Moffat's intent clear, but cleverly delivered, and we learn properly that this is the return of Villengard, an organisation and planet that built and sold weaponry before being destroyed and turned into a banana grove.
Bananas are good.
Introduced in Moffat's first story of the revival, The Empty Child and the Doctor Dances. This is probably the most imminent danger 15 has been in, and the acting shoot he puts in here is fantastic. Sure, he cries a little too frequently, and it disappears between some shots, even when he leaks a little from the nose later, but the way he rambles and attempts to stay calm is different than what we've seen before, in the last episode being scared shitless and running. This being a very different situation, and a much darker tone, both in the text and cinematography. Seriously, it was sunny outside this morning and I had to close the curtains to get a clear look at the screen. 15 sends Ruby away to see what the previous screaming was about and to find him a decent counterbalance to stop him from having to stay on one foot. Ruby makes it to where the ambulance executed John and finds a tube with his name on it, only to be scared by drones above who clean up the smoke, giving Ruby and us a great view of the surrounding space. And 15 tells us it's her first time on a new planet. And it's a good moment, but the last episode had a 6-month time jump. Are you telling me in all that time all they've done is go to space stations and Earth? Church on Ruby Road, Earth. Space Babies, Space Station. Devils Chord, Earth. And I'm pretty sure Mancoopolis, which I haven't read, is on Earth. I know it's been said Russell intended for Devils Chord to be episode 2, but now it's feeling even more like it should have been the pre-finale story. Ruby brings the tube back to the Doctor, apparently a suitable counterweight, and thanks to his demeanour, she figures out that it is like a cremation urn that she guesses, but is John's body compressed into a flesh tube. Ew.
Ooh, I'm having a day.
In a clever turn, he has her toss it in her hand to weigh it, and he wants her to throw it to him to counter, but she doesn't want to take that risk, tensely inching towards him, which is a great moment between them, and she gets super close to him, like she could at least do him the favour of standing at arm's length. He says possible goodbyes, and in yet another musical performance, I guess songs are just their thing, and on the final word, after some babbling, they make the trade, him getting to put his foot down. The landmine only advances a little, but with strange timing, and he speaks a strange poem that is of course a Moffat reference, but might be about Missy, so that's a bit to unpack. But he calms down only for the tube to activate, bringing up an AI hologram of John, with elements of his personality, including his catchphrase a lot, but we see that the AI is programmed to be as lovingly tender to Villengard as possible.
Sorry, killed by an ambulance.
Life is cheap. Patients are expensive.
The Doctor tells us the ambulance cost, so they only heal according to an algorithm to maximise profit. And now is when Splice turns up, and boy is she just the most annoying character until we get to the end. And I get that she's there for the commentary on the good side of faith, as Mundy's faith is insulted later, but God, her I want to see my daddy even though you're giving me constant evidence he's dead and I don't care about it shtick is just frustrating. And I suppose the young actor is doing what she can in the role, but still. Just to be extra sad, she tells us her mum is in heaven and her dad is all she has. And as the hologram comes back, Ruby tussles with her to keep her away from the mine, devolving into wrestling on the ground. Ruby eventually gets her calm, and we get a little demonstration on how the mine works. A twist. It uses the body standing on it as energy for the blast, and the Doctor being who he is, not only puts Ruby in danger, but his body exploding would put a dent in the planet itself. Mundy shows up, just to make the Doctor more tense, looking for Splice, and she figures out the situation, well, most of it. And she introduces herself as an Anglican Marine, and wants the Doctor to drop the tube, thinking he's dead anyway. Might as well make sure the tube is okay.
Great name, Monday Flynn. You should marry Ruby. Then you'll be Monday Sunday. Go on, get married. I'd laugh every day.
15 gets some good nudges about the church in, and Mundy gets a call from Canterbury, who is worried about their enemies that no one sees. The Castarians might be on the move. But she hangs up, going all tsundere. 15 asks about Castarians and drops another clever bomb I only realised just before he tells us. The Castarians aren't real. No one has ever seen them, but the soldiers are afraid as their fellow soldiers keep getting killed. Mundy tries to shoot the Doctor's arm, attempting to have him drop the tube, before the failsafe kicks in and the landmine blows anyway. 15 tells her the whole destroying the planet thing with great delivery, and the ambulance picks up the combat, and considering it has the same face as Susan Triad, and the TARDIS is scanned with the same scanners as the ambulance used here in the finale, we're getting some hints here that I'm not sure will be apparent until they appear. The ambulance hooks into the Doctor while the Hollow Dad shows Splice some photos, getting her annoying ass out of the way, for now, and Ruby figures that more combat will distract it, so Ruby fires into the air, but it's not enough. So Mundy decides to take one for the team. Everything going to shit as Canterbury turns up and just absolutely goes full
5 rounds rapid
into Ruby, sending her careening into the pit. And yeah, holy shit, this is a raising of the stakes. It happens just far enough into the episode to be good for the pacing, and while the multiple dramatic slow motions are a bit much, the moment is done pretty perfectly, and also induces some drama in us as the last companion who got shot was Bill, and we all know how that went. Canterbury is pretty unapologetic, and the ambulance connects to Ruby too, having a stroke when it can't figure out her next of kin. Ruby bringing the snow again, before it freezes in the air as she falls unconscious. And yeah, while it's pretty dramatic and mostly well done in the story, as the ambulance won't heal someone not part of the war, I have to say Ruby's hurt dialogue and Millie's hurt acting left a lot to be desired. But we don't have to worry about that while she's unconscious. The Doctor is having a bit of a rough time as Mundy confirms the Doctor's diagnosis of the bomb's size, and Canterbury does all he can to save Ruby, now attempting to hack into the robot to give her care. It's now 15 tells us the truth. The Marines need to surrender. The landmine, if we've forgotten, is Villengard, so it's theirs. They need to surrender because, as the Doctor uses Ruby to figure it out, the Villengard tech came when the Marines landed and advertised their presence, meaning the algorithm in the tech is killing just enough Marines to keep them fighting and buying. Super fucked up, but great commentary from Moffat. Honestly, this feels sort of like a Big Finish episode in the best way possible. 15 bashes their faith in their god and war, but Mundy needs proof, you know, the opposite of faith, and 15 points out just how fucking stupid this is coming from her. Like those videos of Christians and atheists arguing, they go, "Prove God." No, you prove there isn't a god. Like, babes, you're the one saying something's there, it's on you to prove that. I like that argument and the way this episode uses it, but being undecided myself, not religious in any way, but I agree there's a possibility of something being out there. So I have no quarrel with anyone's belief system, as long as they don't use it as a crutch like to say, hate people different from them. But I think this episode gets it just right in making this point, but not actively insulting any religious viewers. 15 needs to find proof, so uses John's love for his daughter to have him go into the network and find said proof, sharing a lovely moment. Canto and Mundy have their little crush talk, and predictably tragedy comes as, just as they're confessing, the ambulance executes Canto for attempting to hack it. And I didn't care much for him, but as the hologram gives Mundy his last message, you really feel for Mundy here as she blames herself. The algorithm was protecting itself and calls backup, as it fights against John, eventually seemingly taking him over, which for this ridiculous child must be traumatizing. The algorithm is taken over and the landmine goes to blow, with Mundy resigning herself and the child to death while she continues to ask about where John is. Oh my god.
Where's my daddy? I'm not living without my daddy.
Shut the fuck up, you cunt!
Just in time for the drama, John takes over again, using the love of a father to overwrite the landmine and give Ruby the care she needs. A pretty good resolution, if a bit cliché, but the heart is there.
The whole Villengard arms industry, all of it,
just got beaten up by this little kid's dad.
The Doctor runs around celebrating, almost doing Gangnam Style, and he exposits everything to Ruby, except for how she got shot, and what happened to Canterbury. They watch the sunrise and say their goodbyes, with the infamous trailer shot I didn't expect to see in an episode. The Doctor admitting even if he dislikes Faith, it's a great thing to have, and the kid finally gets a good moment, and 15 tells them he'll check in on them. Strangely, he checks for his Tardis key that he seems to have lost, so they use Ruby's. So does that mean the ambulance took it? Does Susan Triad, or whatever the fuck her name ends up being, have it later on? Who knows, but the Doctor seems strangely calm about it. John's hologram shows up to say goodbye, and with one last hopeful look, they leave, as the episode ends with a lovely send-off. So that was Boom, and yeah, probably the best so far, with the only detractors being some dialogue and acting, the story itself being pretty solid. All of the Stephen Moffat references are pretty good, most not overt and working into the story quite well, but I will be honest, I was distracted by them for a fair whack at the time. 15's acting was stellar and mostly gave me what I wanted from him, a more high-stakes setting where unlike last episode he can't just run away. Something deadly he has no choice and no defense against. And after all of these happy-go-lucky toned episodes, it was needed. Ruby was pretty good while she was there, even when taken out, her dramatic injury served the story pretty well, and considering it looks like next episode might be a Dr. Light story, it was good to have a lot of focus on him, and Ruby can get some more next episode. The clerics were included well, and Verada as Mundy was a pretty endearing side character, which makes me really excited to see what's done with her later. But unlike her, Splice was very annoying. John didn't have a lot to do, and had to act like a glitching hologram for most of it, but he did that well. And Canto was fine, nothing special, but wasn't frustrating. The commentary, while a little in your face, is delivered greatly. Moffat's dialogue reminding me of the Zygon two-parter and its speech, one of my favourite moments in the Moffat era. And this really brings back that doctor-y feeling, where he has to figure out the situation and rightly pins the blame on the participants, not wholly. That would be unfair, but the small dressing down he gives Mundy and her hypocritical stance were great, and nicely balanced by his words at the end. The story not having a real antagonist, with the algorithm just doing capitalist things and profiting off of their suffering. Deaths and war is very prevalent, and felt like something an older story would do, or maybe a classic Star Trek commentary. But it was handled very well here, and as said before, while cliché, the power of fatherly love overcoming the heartless industry was done well. I praise the story, and while I might not rate it as high as, say, Wild Blue Yonder, I would have enjoyed it just as much, if not for that episode's nostalgia and the way they integrated it into the 60th anniversary. So I'll give this episode, Boom by Stephen Moffat, an 8.5 on par with Church and Ruby Road, but for totally different reasons as they're very different stories. But both episodes excel in the medium they reside in. That episode being a great emotional but fun Christmas romp, and this being a tense war drama focused on the characters, and filled with commentary, relevant in pretty much most of recent human history.
But I would walk 500 miles and I would walk 500 more.
Did you want to see the Curse of Clyde Langer if the narrative shot itself in the head and was somehow less personal? Well, if that's what you wanted, boy did you get it. Sure, a lot of this episode, the creepiness, the cinematography, the base ideas were all good, but the actual episode and the execution of Russell's script take all these great puzzle pieces, put them back in their box and set them on fire. This episode pisses me off more than any of this era, because it could have been amazing. The potential was there, and even with fantastic moments, by the end, it shits the bed. So let's get into what was great about this episode, and how it made me feel as if I was personally betrayed. Something to point out as we start is that this episode lacks a title sequence, really adding to the unease, as the Doctor, in his worst outfit by far, looking like he stole Steve Zissou's beanie, and one of Nardol's jumpers lands on a Welsh cliff top with Ruby. She tells him she's been to Wales twice, and the Doctor has a strange line. You see, there were rumours a while ago about a possible Sea Devils spin-off called The War Between the Land and Sea, which is name-dropped here as the Doctor describes the landscape. Could this make the rumours more genuine? Or is that ridiculous, because I can't imagine David Tennant in School Reunion saying, "Oh, Sarah Jane, I bet you'll have so many Sarah Jane adventures." 15 mentions a future Prime Minister we might see later, an absolute nutter, and he steps on a string, seemingly part of someone's art project. And Ruby finds some messages on this witchy shrine, telling one Mad Jack to rest in peace. And although it was obvious why the camera panned to Ruby in the way that it did, the Doctor disappearing while keeping the same shot going was effective. Ruby seems to think he stepped back in the TARDIS, but she can't get in, even with the key. Strangely, she thinks,
I hope you're not having a pee around the back.
which is one of many lines in this episode I never thought I would hear in Doctor Who. And she notices a woman in the distance, who, no matter where Ruby goes, always appears 73 yards away. And although I'm not sure of the significance of 73 in the episode, it is a perfect distance for the viewer. You clearly see the woman, but you get no clear details. You can see that she has a face, but not what it looks like, and that was a really clever decision. Eventually, the woman is positioned under this very aesthetic tree, and one of the many unexplained things that is clear from the start is that the woman is trying to communicate, making gestures, pointing at herself, rubbing her palm, holding her hands together and tilting her head. You can't really glean any obvious message, but I have been told that we may see the woman's face, and there is a photo taken behind the scenes of what seems to be the woman played by Hilary Hobson with a line on her face, presumably a makeup effect we'll see at some point in the future. Although there is something I just noticed now, if Ruby takes that many steps forward to get the woman under the tree, and the woman always stays 73 yards away, why is she under the tree when Ruby comes just out of the TARDIS at the end of the episode? Well, anyway, Ruby gets fed up and walks to the nearest town. The woman always there, even when she seems to have disappeared. It's all shot and edited effectively. Ruby runs into a hiker near town, played by Susan Twist, who she seems to almost recognise, and since it's in the right time frame, I'm wondering if this is a random character, or the seemingly modern-day character Susan Twist will play in the finale, Susan Triad. Ruby has a pretty natural conversation with the hiker, and asks her to meet the woman and apologise for whatever reason she's following her for. But all that happens when they interact is the hiker enters a sort of trance, turns to Ruby with no emotion, and runs away screaming. Not from the woman, but from Ruby. And it's even slightly snowing. It does that a few times this episode, but with no real connection to the story arc like the last times clearly were. But we can infer that it means she has a connection to the woman. Ruby enters town and we get possibly the most creepy shot of the woman yet, staying in the middle of the dark road as Ruby enters the local pub. And most of the characters we meet here are pretty annoying. There's these two wannabes looking like they're gonna put on a community college play of Twilight, just a guy, an unpleasant bartender and seemingly owner of the pub/inn, played by Maxine Evans, who played one of the Welsh cannibals in Torchwood. And lastly, the smart older woman at the bar, the only nice one, Sian Phillips, who's been considered for the show and acted in Big Finish before, playing Enid Meadows. And considering this is meant to be a showcase of how great Welsh horror can be, it does the disservice of having most of the Welsh cast be complete arseholes for no reason. We get a really creepy scene where they try and wind Ruby up, being offended she thinks they don't know how to pay by phone, even though they act as though they have no idea what any of that means when she brings it up. And although none of them believe in Mad Jack, or the apparent fairy circle the Doctor stepped in, they keep at the creepiness for a long while. So, while effective in the moment, on reflection, I just find these people really unpleasant and I wouldn't get a beer at this pub. They talk about the woman still outside in the wind and rain, so the bloke in the pub decides to do the right thing and get the woman out from the cold and damp. But she works her influence on him, making him run in terror, much to the joy of the little punk boy. Ooh, nice rhyme. The only other great thing we get from the scene is a term Enid coins to denote the woman's following at a distance. From Latin, semper distans, always distant.
Really though, he's running, he saw that woman and he ran away. He ran away like the devil was on his bum.
Enid gets some more good lines and Ruby stays the night, heading back up the hills to talk to the TARDIS the next day. The day after that, she's kicked out, as Josh, the bloke, is so freaked out from the woman that he makes the barkeep send her on her way. Ruby says goodbye to the Tardis, thinking the Doctor might have abandoned her, and takes the train back home, getting a few creepy shots of the woman standing out the window, watching her. And I'm not sure if she's actually there or not. Something about the motion blur in these shots making me feel as if she's composited in, but I'm not too sure about that. I guess I'll just have to check in the latest episode of Doctor Who Unleashed. Ruby makes her way back home to see Carla and Cherry, who are just as good as ever. Well, right now. But Ruby makes the same mistake as Clyde, letting her mum get wrapped up in the evil curse. In fact, isn't Clyde's mum named Carla? That is two black women named Carla who are mothers of the main character, getting influenced by a psychic force that makes them hate their children. I didn't even notice that coincidence until I was sitting here recording this. I guess that's just another little tidbit I can add to sum up why I think Russell's writing fails in this episode. Carla has the clever idea to capture what the woman says on her phone so Ruby can hear it, and Mrs. Flood appears again to ask Ruby what the hell she's doing before heading down to her basement. It's nice to see her again, but we don't get any more hints as to who she could be after the last time. The woman is shot creepily with some nice whispery effects, but it's clear from the start that Carla is already under the power's influence and runs off. Ruby follows her and sees Carla scowling at her from a taxi, causing Ruby to have a little breakdown. She heads back home to tell Cherry and Carla is radio silent, until she sneaks back into the house while Ruby's shopping and changes the locks. And I guess Cherry has no complaints, as Ruby is left outside as Carla pulls the I'm not your real mum card. The scene is shot quite well again, Dylan Holmes-Williams as the director and the other crew having done very well this episode. It looks great. Some time later, Ruby is at a cafe and is met by Kate Stewart, returning, played again by Gemma Redgrave. Her second appearance in a row where she's under some sort of psychic influence a couple of minutes after telling us she and Unit all have psychic defenses.
What a joke.
She posits that this may be an alternate timeline, which, yeah, by the end it is, so I suppose that is one clever resolution to one of many of the lingering strings at the end. But Kate's good while she's here, even if all she does is impress upon us there is more supernaturally based threats in the world, and fail to take in the woman, falling to her influence as soon as her people surround her. Kate does something a lot of us would do, taking a photo of the woman, with the zoom not working. But as soon as she's under the influence, Kate just kind of gets up and leaves with a strange underlying effect on her voice. Ruby, understandably, getting a bit cross. We now jump forward a bit, Ruby's age told by the surrounding cards as she ages, meeting many men unable to settle down as the woman still distracts her as her constant companion, leading to a few funny lines, and Ruby eventually reaches 40. You can tell by her clothes and glasses, because, boy, the makeup and prosthetic people must have been feeling lazy as fuck. As her glasses and the happy 40th birthday cards are literally the only indication for a while that any time has passed. She notices that Welshman Roger ap Gwilliam, also known as Mad Jack, in his younger years, although how that fails to be connective to anything is a point I'll bring up later, and he is cleverly played by Anurin Bernard. Roger is just how the Doctor described him, an utter nutter with a fetish for nuclear warfare. It was rumoured he might be the Minister of War mentioned back in Series 9, but considering Big Finish went and did that with more explicit references, I don't think that was the intent here.
Mad Jack, they used to call me.
The face of Bo, they called me.
Ruby abandons her boy toy to apply to help with Roger's political party, Albion, meaning Britain, also the name of a hospital back in Series 1. It's also now she seems to accept the woman as part of her life, which I would have liked to see her work through the emotions it takes to get to that point more. Sure, it's a nice scene, but there is so much more that could have been explored there on an emotional and horror-based level. Ruby becomes Roger's glorified coat hanger as he gets an interview with Amal Rajan, a real British journalist. Roger is on his way to become PM, but is a little too radical. Amal asking if Roger wants to ignore the cost of living and real issues, and instead spend billions on buying and shooting nukes because he can. Roger making sure they cut the question. It's funny, I'm not too acquainted with Amal Rajan, but looking at the photos I can see of him at the top of Google Images, it looks like they put more effort into making him look older than with Ruby. with an indication that this seems to be 2046, and apparently there was a great Russian war in 2031. Well, I'm not looking forward to that. Roger and Ruby get their first interaction, where all he does is ask the name of another woman, be low-key creepy, and introduce himself. And this is one of the good uses of the unanswered question, something this episode tries but rarely succeeds at. As the next time we see the woman, Marty Bridges, played by Sophie Ablett, is at Roger's victory party, where she's sitting quietly in the corner like a wounded animal, and we can only imagine what happened to her between then and now with Roger to make her act this way, as she seems to agree with Ruby's feelings on Roger.
Oh, he is a monster.
The Albion team arrive at a footy stadium, unable to get on the grass for some reason, and we see the woman again before Ruby is distracted by Marty, who we see more of, and it's inferred here more that she might be being preyed upon or something just as nefarious by Roger. The problem with reviewing these episodes hours after they come out is the cast. I have no idea who this black gentleman is by name or by actor, so I'm just going to have to say this guy. And it kind of makes me feel as if I'm being lazy in my writing, but in truth, I just have no idea who he is and don't want to go through every cast member he could be before I find his headshot on Google Images. He tells Ruby that in a few days Roger gets access to Pakistan's nukes. Oh boy, I can't wait. And both her and Marty realise this fucker is going to launch them off. So Ruby apologises for what happened to Marty and gets onto the grass, using her super future high-tech phone to measure 73 yards from William and manipulate the woman, weaponising her next to Roger. It's a great scene, and it's the clearest we see Ruby standing up as the doctor's gone, and really all she's doing is walking backwards slowly with her phone out, apparently imposing enough for multiple guns to be trained on her for some reason. Yeah, it's a badass moment, but when you reduce it to a bunch of men yelling at a woman with her phone out threatening her with guns, it looks a little silly, but to me at least it's badass enough to get over that perception. Roger notices the woman and is sent running like a little bitch, immediately resigning, and that's the story over with. Yeah, you know what, I think this episode should have been a two-parter. The first part only teasing the political stuff and focusing on how creepy and isolating the woman is. Then, the second part can fully explore Roger and Ruby's takedown event. Then, giving us the resolution that would allow so much more of this story to be explored. For Marty's treatment not to be outright said, but her personality before and after to be explored more. She would be an interesting character to see go through that change from closer up. So I'm definitely going to get the novelization of this episode, but as it is now, it's good, but could be better.
Life is good, but it can be better.
Roger gives the same response about the woman as Josh when asked by the press. And Ruby celebrates her victory, once again questioning the woman before we jump ahead another 40 years. Ruby clearly not having aged, and them just hiring another actress to play old Ruby. And Amanda Walker, as the credits call her, does a pretty good job, as she is taken by a young woman back to the Tardis, where she is still followed, and the Tardis has been grown over. The perception filter apparently having people leave flowers without knowing why. But also, seemingly a scrap of paper very similar to the fairy circle being laid next to it. So there could be a connection between the TARDIS, its perception filter, and the fairy circle, but that's another thing that this story doesn't explore. Ruby speaks to the TARDIS out loud, apparently never having found her birth mother and not knowing what happened to Carla, but thinking that the woman is the reason she hasn't been able to make snow again, and has hope, saying it's very the Doctor. Whether she means hope or the woman is unclear, but it's still a nice line. Even older, Ruby is now seemingly in a home of sorts, being ever so slightly patronised as she tells of her once-used ability to make snow. And we hear that familiar lament in the score, the one she played for Trudy when a girl left her, which I suppose is nicely thematic as she tells us that everyone abandoned her in the end except the woman, who appears in her room. Closer, and this scene is pretty freaky, as the lights flicker and the woman gets closer and closer, always with her back turned, and as the woman turns around, Ruby reaches out, only to appear back on the cliff, under the tree as the mysterious woman. And the POV shot isn't that good, and we still don't know why she makes those movements, but this time she distracts Ruby enough by whispering "don't step" repeatedly to stop the Doctor from trampling on the fairy circle. Good considering how fairies act in the Whoniverse.
She belongs with us.
The child belongs here.
Ruby also changes by saying that this is the 3rd time she's been to Wales, and the Doctor knows to leave the circle alone, and he makes fun of her for seeing a woman that is now no longer there. And we get a nice little ending scene between the two. There was great stuff in that episode, which I pointed out, but there is something this episode is absolutely shit at. Unanswered questions. You see, there are 3 types of unanswered questions in a story I can think of. Meaningful ones, like in The Prisoner, or the Doctor Who episode Midnight. Forgotten or unneeded ones, where it isn't important or was unplanned, and then there are lazy choices. And that's what I think happened here. There are so many questions that there is little answer to, that infuriate me. Not just from my perspective as someone who dislikes unfinished/cancelled shows, or when a show can't make up its own ending so gives us a little and lets the audience dream up the rest like Big O. A show I loved, with a good ending, but it's still an ending I disliked. There is so much unanswered in this story. Why is there a time loop? Was the fairy circle to blame, or was it something else? Where did the Doctor go? Who stops Gwilliam if this episode is an alternate timeline, as the Doctor still mentions Gwilliam outside of the time loop? If old Ruby, as the woman, can talk as seen in the end, why doesn't she talk the first go around? What is the woman gesturing? If the woman is Ruby, why does she make people afraid of young Ruby? Why are the woman and old Ruby played by different actors? Since it shouldn't matter because the woman's face is undefinable. Why was Roger called Mad Jack when that name was on the fairy circle, and they don't seem to be connected, as Roger being an evil prat exists outside of this time loop? What is with the multiple mentions of perception filters with almost nothing being done with that idea? And there's more, but that is most of what annoyed me here as I re-watched the episode. You can have unanswered questions, but if the audience is given little to infer to fill those voids, it leaves the episode with a big narrative hole in it. And if these questions are to be answered in the finale or in season 2, it may give a good payoff, but still leaves this as a half-baked narrative. Even with those complaints, there is some great stuff. The Roger subplot, while could do with a little more exploration with him and Marty's character, what we get is good. And although she could do more, it is good to see Ruby alone, but still making her way in the world. Ruby herself was written well in the dialogue and acted very well by Millie, but her place in the story and her actions could have had a little more drama or be a little more driven to her saving the day in the political plot. As she can't really have moments like that when she's more focused with the woman, an unknowable and unexplainable entity. And the old Ruby was acted very well too. I loved the creepy atmosphere of the woman, as that's really my jam. And the political stuff, while not really having a complex message more than nuke bad, they were both enjoyable. And even though the tones didn't match, so it was almost as if we hopped into another story, I was enjoying this episode enough not to notice. And this episode is really enjoyable, and all those lingering questions only really started to annoy me as I got to the ending the first go around and rewatched the episode and noticed all these things that either weren't explained or only lazily alluded to, so Russell can shrug his shoulders and go, all the bits are there, figure it out. This episode could have been better, and from a clinical perspective, it may only be worthy of a 5 out of 10. But I did enjoy it a lot, so I'll give it a subjective score of 7, even if I thought it was going to be a 10 out of 10 and I wish it was that. And while I'm here, I am going to update my rankings. I think recency bias was an issue at the start of the season, and comparing how I felt about those episodes to Boom, I'm going to reduce Space Babies and Devils Chord by half a point, matching Devils Chord with 73 yards, as both are concepts and performances I enjoyed, but had fundamental issues that kept me from thinking it was great. So the same score for them both seems fitting. I'm not sure about next episode, Dot and Bubble, but I'm hoping the series may rise up again with the finale and Rogue, as different writers are involved with Rogue, and I think the payoffs of the many mystery boxes will make for a satisfying finale, even if the way they were set up wasn't as satisfying.
You keep driving, you black spear chucker piece of shit!
Episode 5, Dot and Bubble by Russell T Davies. An episode that I only thought would be good if Syl was the twist villain, but much like many of the season, there's clearly some great stuff here. But, much like the rest, there are also some failings. We have a lot of possible commentary, some overt that is helped by the suddenness of its reveal, and small details hidden throughout, and others that are either not explained upon to a sufficient degree, or seemingly come about not of the story's own volition, just seeming to be a happy accident.
We have happy accidents.
We also do have to be specific in the fact that this is another Dr. Light episode, which is a little disappointing considering last episode was as well. But that does mean we're looking at this under a slightly different scope than usual. So without further ado, let's see what works and what doesn't in this episode. The episode starts with our episode's protagonist, Lindy Pepperbean, played by Callie Cook, waking up and immediately heading into her influencer echo chamber by calling her dot machine to bubble, literally bubbling around her head with screens. And you might think that this is some commentary on kids be looking at their phones or businesses manipulating people with tech, and you could see that in this story, but the ideas those are based upon kind of disappear the more we go into the story, to be replaced with other themes, one of which is quite clever, as the very hidden seeds are planted as early as when she enters the bubble. No idea why, but for some reason I always think of Dot and Bubble in the same beat as Nick Kershaw's Cloak and Dagger.
Dot and Bubble.
We see that they even rely upon the Dot to do pretty much everything. Run their lives, even tell them where to walk. And the bubble itself, while I find a lot of the people's attitudes a wee bit grating, is not only a clever idea with some nice little details, but the CGI holds up fairly well, as the screens track Lindy and any other users' heads. From this early, we're noticing both in the background and from dialogue from Lindy and Gothic Paul, played by Pete McHale, people aren't cropping up where they should be. And even from here, Callie Cook's performance is shown in quality. She has the brattiness down, and some honestly weird facial expressions, but is also good at pretending to be the mindless drone type when needed. Although her attitude, much like the other young adults, gets frustrating sometimes. We learn that she hasn't peed in 3 days, however that works. Please stay away from me, Dr. P. I hope this isn't some sort of Dr. Moon situation where Rusty Davies will come out years from now and be like, yeah, Dr. P is actually a future version of the Doctor uploaded into virtual space. We see Lindy's crush, cool guy Ricky September, who yeah, he looks fine, generic model, but it seems somehow he has Justin's powers from Total Drama. As everyone in Fine Time, the domed-off town, is following him. And considering we learn later that all these characters are rich kids, it's funny that the system deems Ricky as the top account in the top 0.01%. The Doctor interrupts her watching, and considering the later reveal, Lindy's initial look of slight unease takes on another meaning here. Once again, this through line was very well thought out, and as we roll into the credits we see a slug-like thing waiting in her apartment. Strange considering later we learn that they eat people alphabetically, and her number won't be up for a while, but it works as a nice little spook to hint into the story. We see a nice overview of the city and dome, and the dome not only keeps them separated from the outside literally, it's a nice touch considering what we learn about the inhabitants, being the rich and racist. It's a nice little visual representation on the gap between the rich and other classes. The Holo News is very insistent that nothing's wrong apart from some weather satellites, and we see from early on the system seems to be in on the goings-on, as it redirects Lindy around a dead body. I wonder what species these people are, since they have race issues, look like humans, but also have green blood. It was probably just easier to get past the censors this way, as this episode can get quite gruesome. Lindy is at work, not actually seeming to do much, but it must make them feel better about themselves. And Gothic Paul once again updates us on the missing people, and Ruby appears in her bubble. A better woman than me, because I would have lost patience much sooner with this bitch. Ruby gets informed of how they work and asks Lindy to look around her, taking a while as she is really adverse to actually doing anything, looking between her screens when she notices her workmates aren't answering, and those that should be in the room in front of her are missing. Ruby doesn't let Lindy wave her off and has her look to the side. Bertie, her co-worker, being bored by this big slug thing, apparently referred to as man-traps, behind the scenes, but not explicitly said in the episode to my knowledge. Lindy is now proper scared, Ruby helping her drop the bubble, so we get a clear look at the thing. The way they're shot here, really effective. The man-trap's presence is built up well, but after the initial reveal, once they're on the streets, I don't really find them that scary. A little creepy, sure, but not scary. Although they do look good, physical props with CGI touch-ups, learning from where the Thing 2011 failed. But they only really pose a threat to this incompetent populace who can't walk in a straight line without instructions. More of Lindy's friends are being compromised, and Ricky is still dancing to Itsy Bitsy Teeny Weeny Yellow Polka Dot Bikini. that Lindy uses to calm herself down, keeping her, for now, as a sympathetic character, but is mad and gets suspicious again as the doctor pops up. 15 and Ruby get her to lower the bubble, but she just can't fucking walk without it. So she does use the bubble, making it to the elevator before getting cornered by one of the man traps. And once again, this is one of the only pretty spooky scenes. The last time these things are scary for anything other than how they look. But this is the moment in the trailer where I clocked part of what was going on, as the bubble tells her to walk into the slug. But when she doesn't, it ignores her and leaves. 15 is trying to figure out why she's different, and we get the same issue from Gridlock, as the police aren't answering and likely don't exist. Lindy walks the streets and after some more corralling, drops the bubble again to see people acting as if it's normal, while others are being eaten, pretty horrifically for this show. She uses the dot to find a hiding spot. I mean, it's not a very good hiding spot, but sure. Ruby and 15 try to calm her down and get information, Lindy's xenophobia assuming they came from outside the dome, just like the Doctor, who can't manage to get into the city. We get told that this is basically the rich kid paradise, and we see Lindy's mum, who with her face I assumed sent her kid here to die. That would have been a plot twist. Get it? Twist, because this is another Susan Twist cameo as Lindy's mum, which 15 and Ruby finally notice, realizing she is the same as the Villengard nurse, and that Ruby has seen her elsewhere, probably in the aborted timeline from 73 Yards, though we did see make impressions outside of its timeline, so that makes sense. It turns out 15 and Ruby are in the same room, which sets Lindy off, who apparently thought 15 must have just looked identical to that black guy she blocked earlier. Oh dear.
I understand we all look the same. Are you Chinese?
Lindy brings in her remaining friends, many clearly dead, but no one believes her until Gothic Paul is viciously murked. Seriously, it's pretty gruesome. 15 hacks into the group chat with some more lines that just, holy shit, it's so very well done that I had no idea they were all racist until the end because of some of these lines.
I know this is wrong, and when this is over, he is going to be so disciplined. I can't wait. 15
tells them where to go, underground tunnels that will lead to coded doors, then leading outside. Lindy's dot is running out of power, so she's shit out of luck, getting a funny gag where she walks into a pole. Twice. With such open spaces, there are a few tight shots that really sell the tenseness, and when attempting but failing to skirt around some man traps, Ricky September appears out of nowhere, played by Tom Rhys-Harris. And they have a nice moment where he acts like the dot, directing her out of the danger, and he's a pretty nice guy. Lindy's also pretty happy, hugging him, apparently never having to do that when the bubble's a thing. And he's shown to be even nicer when they enter the conduit building, and he finds out the whole homeworld has gone out the same way they are. He even comforts her while she sees someone devoured.
I thought this was the worst day of my life, but maybe it's the best.
There's still thousands of people being eaten alive.
They make it underground and now have to enter a series of passcodes to get through the door towards the exit. Lindy charged up her dot while Ricky was looking at the information on the homeworld. And now with the bubble activated, 15 and Ruby are getting pretty psyched to see Ricky, who is just so genuine and not seemingly a dirty racist. Ricky starts with the door while Lindy checks on her friends who didn't heed the warning. 15 has an idea cooking, figuring out how the man traps target people, him surprised at the simplicity as he determines everyone is being killed in alphabetical order, meaning the most likely suspect in their deaths would have access to the list. Lindy now next, as we see the only other person ahead of her devoured as they try and warn the poor girl, after her friends have also all been killed. Lindy has a little freak out, but Ricky does a pretty good job calming her down. He's pretty nice, I hope he survives. The man traps can't reach her and 15 realizes the truth. The dot system apparently became sentient, sick of the 1%, and trying to kill them with the man traps it grew within the city. The dot machine itself now gearing up to kill her. This is a pretty interesting idea. The humans around just such arseholes that the AI learns how terrible they are and decides the world is better off without them. But it's not really very well built up at all. Sure, we get to see scenes where the bubble mechanism sends people away from noticing danger or sends them directly into danger. But there are also a few holes. The Doctor says it's the truth, and then it seemingly is. There's no information on if the dot is on Homeworld, We can only assume that since the man-traps did the same there, but there was no previous mention that the dot was an AI, or could gain sentience, which would allow us to think that it possibly could gain sentience. And there is no basis for the man-traps being made anywhere in the city. No hints, or at least nothing I could glean. So unless I've missed something, once again, Russell has tried something and just hasn't seemed to think it through. It just sort of happens, and it's a good idea, and I suppose the execution is good once it happens, but when you sit down and think about the lead-up, there is very little detail, and none of it really fleshing out this idea. That is a similarity to 73 Yards, but at least the ending is much better. And later on when we get to that ending, I'll do a little comparison, comparing what I had to say about 73 Yards to this episode. The dot is actually pretty intimidating as it hits Lindy a few times, so she swaps with Ricky, who belts it away like he's Luke using a training lightsaber while Lindy does the numbers. Ricky is pretty cool, and while Lindy struggles to open the door, the dot drops a heavy chain on him. But as she doesn't have enough time to get through the door, she betrays him, telling the dot that his birth name is higher in the list than her. And while she does escape, and it fits in with both her sympathetic character we know and the filthy racist she'll turn out to be, even if it seems her peers are worse, his death is gruesome. Sure, it's only suggestive as we don't see it in gory detail. It's pretty obvious the dot flies through his head, all the way through, like the ending of the Flashpoint paradox. Lindy makes it out and avoids 15 and Ruby to talk to her peers, who are happy to see her, packing up and readying to voyage out to the natural surface. She covers up Ricky's death and is pretty reluctant to talk to the travellers, and this is where the ending turns up to 11. Unlike 73 Yards, this works because the narrative wasn't relying on it, so excuse me for a bit while I make some comparisons. While that episode's ending was let down by its inability to reconcile the remaining narrative strands, this episode, in being focused on Lindy and the other people, is much more satisfying, as even though 15 saves them, they refuse his rescue off-planet, rather going into the wilderness where they don't know how to do anything because they'd rather die than hop a flight with a black man in his voodoo ship. Holy shit! And unlike the other subplot, the AI, which could have been the focus, but considering how it was introduced only in the action climax, it wasn't the focus of the story, Lindy was, whereas in 73 Yards, Ruby was the main focus, but it put a lot more narrative weight on Roger and the Circle and the Welsh people and more. Here, we are very well entrenched in Lindy's story and point of view, and since the whole mess doesn't matter to her one bit, I suppose the narrative doesn't care much either. But that doesn't mean the AI twist was included very well. Whereas this race subplot was perfectly inserted into the story without being overt, making sure that no wanker can sit there watching it for the first time screaming "woke" at the screen. I thought it was a class thing until the last minute on my first watch, but picking up the little details on the rewatch, wow, I am impressed. And the acting fits pretty well from all the characters too. The final scene is probably one of the best of the season as the rich white people give 15 the stink eye and he rages. At first, thinking them stubborn and then realising how stupid and pathetic they are to refuse help because it comes from someone different from them. Ruby seemingly realising it just before him, as he's probably new to the whole being black thing. Even the rumbling score adds to the intensity of the moment. It's so great for an episode that was just good beforehand.
And I can save your lives! Now let me!
And with 15 getting back into the Tardis after his rage, the fine time people venture into the world. I think this big rage moment for 15 after the whole race debacle might be one of his top moments this season. And although much like in Boom, I think he cries a bit too much, and I think the pure rage would have fitted in better for the most part with maybe a little despair at the end, it's still a pretty good performance. So, wow, this episode is sort of the opposite of 73 Yards to me. As I said in my review, that episode had almost everything I wanted, but failed to deliver in the end. Ruby didn't have as much agency as I wanted, and the ending from a narrative perspective, as said there, was all over the place. But here, I was fully invested in Lindy, even if she was a bitch, sometimes in double meaning and sometimes overtly. And while this also has a plot that feels a little unresolved, it more than delivers a strong enough ending, meaning-wise and acting-wise. But in the beginning, I didn't think it was my type of episode. Even though, much like 73 Yards, the first 90% is pretty great, but I only harp on 73 Yards so much because I wanted it to be the 10 out of 10 it could have been. And also, because that episode's the previous one, it's easier to compare it to this one. But speaking strictly about Dot and Bubble now, Callie Cook played Lindy Pepperbean very well. And although the character wasn't super likeable, that was by design. And the choice to make her the most likeable of the survivors, as she seems to be the closest to accepting the Doctor's help, which is saying something considering how she acts, is phenomenal. Ricky was a pretty good side protagonist, and while it sucked to not see Ruby in 15 as much as I wanted, especially after a Dr. Light episode last week, they are used effectively, and 15 in the ending more than makes up for his disappearance for most of the episode. The other characters do pretty well to fit in the world, some likeable, some walking tropes, but with how many of them we see, it really helps to flesh out the world and also justifies the Dot's revolution slightly. As if I regularly had to deal with these assholes, I'd revolt too. But the Dot as a twist villain may make sense in retrospect and gives us a good fight scene. It could have been introduced much better. As other than Mr. P, there weren't really any freaky things happening with the tech that couldn't be rationalized as some sort of algorithm like, say, in Boom. But in retrospect, once we learn the twist, are clearly villainous actions. Maybe if you shuffled some lines around so the Doctor knew what the slugs were from off-world, but he didn't know how they got in, and then it's revealed the Dot let them in because it gained sentience, it may feel a bit more natural, but as it is, it's a bit of a distraction for me. But apart from that, this story was pretty good, and had an excellent ending, even if it wasn't as much my thing as last week's could have been. It at least comes together quite well on paper and in execution, but of course not perfect, so even though I think I like 73 Yard's tone and base ideas better, this episode is far better in execution, even if I thought I was going to hate it. And it could do with some small touch-ups, but I'll give episode 5, Dot and Bubble by Russell T Davies, a 7.5 out of 10. Great ending and good episode, even if, just personally, I was left wanting for a little bit more detail with some plot points. But beyond that, it still holds up on its own.
I have relationships with women and sex with men.
And I got news for you. That means you're gay.
And let me tell you, I did my homework. I knew there were going to be Bridgerton references, so I managed to see all available Bridgerton episodes. Don't think I can say it was worth doing it for this, but hey, I got the jokes. Very disappointed there was no cameo though, like with Strictly. So, after last week, this is the final non-Russell episode of the season, which means it has a much higher chance at getting a higher ranking, judging by the past episodes of the season. But let's see if this episode can beat Boom, or if it'll get caught in the shadow of Dot and Bubble's fantastic ending. Either way, the Doctor is probably doing more in this episode than the last two combined, so the chances it's better are probably fairly clear. We start the cold open in 1813 England, in a place called Bath, which other than being a very funny name, seems to be a real place, where Lord Barton, played by Paul Foreman, is being pressured into a marriage with another noble sister. This slight against her purity could either have been him just hanging out alone in a room with her unchaperoned, or banging her very hard against every surface of her room. But that doesn't matter much, as in retaliation for Barton's bitchiness, the other lord menacingly picks him up by the collar and, wanting the drama, uses some form of lightning attack to drain his body and steal his form. Something prevalent from the start of the episode and that continues further on is that the sets are pretty good. The grounds that are used a fair bit this episode look realistic and atmospheric, and the inside of the house, while a little smaller perhaps than most Bridgerton Manor sets, really looks in place. After the credits, we see Ruby and the Doctor dancing, Ruby likening it to Bridgerton, and has apparently been given Chekhov's psychic earrings by the Doctor, allowing her to dance without knowing how, and apparently also having a battle mode programmed. Ruby and 15 are introduced to the owner of the house, Duchess of Pemberton, played by Torchwood actor Indira Varma, who is interested by Ruby, taking her away to mingle with the Ton, but not before encountering feedback from the earrings, allowing the now companionless Doctor to investigate such a strange detail, using his flashy, newly coloured Sonic that I love to see in red to point him in the direction of the hot piece of Captain Jack ripoff up there. Ruby is introduced to Lord Barton, who ends up still being as cheesy and off-putting as before.
Oh, you're not tall glass at all, you're half a pie of shandy.
Ruby departs, but finds a painting of what appears to be the Duke's late mother. This portrait, I suppose played isn't the right word, but I'll use it anyway. Played by Susan Twist, presumably her last cameo until next week's finale, part 1. The Duchess is impressed by Ruby, and they see him now talking to a Miss Emily Beckett, played by Camilla Aiko. And the Duchess and Ruby split, the Duchess following a woman outside, and Ruby following Barton and Emily as they leave. The Doctor confronts Diet Jack, accompanied with a string cover of Bad Guy, another holdover from Bridgerton, modern pop songs covered for the time frame. 15 and the now introduced Rogue kind of start flirting. This newcomer played by Jonathan Groff, and while I feel there are missteps with their characters later, the chemistry they have is palpable. Outside, the Duchess makes her way to the gardens, just to insult another lady, I guess, and she encounters a member of the staff, freaking out that she is not only seen, but heard when spoken to. The housekeeper, played well by this actress for such a short time, the creature masquerading as her, doing the same to the Duchess as what happened to Barton.
People look to me as an arbiter of taste. What? In that dress?
Ruby acts like a voyeur, watching the drama as Barton refuses to marry Emily, unwilling to lose his fortune. But just as it seems he may change his mind, Ruby makes herself known thanks to books falling on her head, spooking him, and she then has to spend time assuring Emily she won't gossip about their time alone.
Oh, this is so Bridgerton.
15 follows Rogue outside where they talk and find the body of the Duchess. 15 seems to be under the impression Rogue had something to do with it, but it seems Rogue has the opposite, taking the Doctor at blaster point, and I really like the design of the weapon here. Ruby continues to console Emily, introducing some words and vernacular that probably shouldn't be around yet, but they have fun together. It's a nice little dynamic for what we see of it. Rogue seems to think 15 is a Chulda shapeshifter, and their dynamic continues to be fun as he leads 15 past the Tardis and into his nice-looking ship. But it's kind of strange his ship has a bird motif when the villains do as well, which have seemingly no connection.
Why isn't it cloaked? It's behind a tree.
Ruby has fun dancing while the disguised villains meet up, their dialogue being written well, as they seem to wish to have a wedding. The Duchess creature wanting to be inside Ruby. Well, that just sounds dirty. 15 and Rogue make it inside his ship with a nice little set, and 15 determines Rogue lost someone. But he is trapped in a field that keeps him still while it charges ready to beam him away. They continue to have good chemistry as 15 is trying to put Rogue on the back foot, mocking him and playing Aussie classic Kylie from the Rogue's speakers. But he repeatedly attempts to shut off while 15 has fun dancing. It's a great scene between the two, but unfortunately the only thing it reminds me of is that one Sharda video. 15 uses the psychic paper, but it picks up on his attraction, Rogue giving in, and after dropping the detail he has a new boss, which I'm sure does tie into something or will tie into something, scans the Doctor, assuming he's a shapeshifter after. The countdown begins, so 15 in a final bid throws his paper at the scanner, I guess, and it shows all his faces, stopping Rogue and giving us a good presentation of the previous incarnations. 10, 13, 1, looking like the floating fake heads from Dimensions in Time, and is that the Schalke Doctor played by Richard E. Grant? Get in! Yeah, I love that. But also, I love that they don't put them in order, so that Jo Martin's placement doesn't need to be figured out when she pops up. Ruby and Emily sneak around and find the corpse of a housemaid, while 15 invites Rogue into the TARDIS.
Oh my God!
Come with me and you'll be in a world of pure imagination. The
scene between them is nice, them both having fun around the TARDIS, 15 asking Rogue to join them. Although I'm not sure if it's more of a gay 2 and Jamie dynamic, or the ish 9 and Jack dynamic, but either way, there is one problem I have with this, and it's that Rogue is only in this episode. The floating is all well and good, but they tease a kiss only about halfway through the episode, and it's just too fast for my liking. I wouldn't mind if a Jack or River Song dynamic came back, and maybe that turned into a sort of romance after multiple appearances, but this is just too rushed for my liking in this show. I get that 15 is more emotional, wears his heart on his sleeve, but my one major problem is just the pacing of the relationship. Feels like it's just so that they can have these points in the romance checked off before the finish. But hey, when this era is licensed off to Big Finish, we can get a box set about the two of them being gay all across time and space, with proper pacing and a bigger exploration of their relationship. The two gays make it back to the dance hall, where they confer with Ruby, both finding bodies, and they assume the Cholder are cosplaying, possibly having picked up Bridgerton TV signals from the stars, however that works, reveling in the drama of their roles, which is another strange coincidence as this came out on Oz Comic Con Melbourne weekend, where one of my mates is going, so targeted at me. Russell T Davies is targeting me.
Oh, it's coming for me! It's coming for me!
So, knowing the Cholder is looking for a scandal, the two men dance, and the scene is actually rather captivating. The dancing is good, the lighting and music are on point, but once they stop, it's time for the not very interesting fake fight. But it ends with Rogue apparently not being a very good actor, which is weird considering you'd think a space bounty hunter would be good at blending in. So he goes right for the proposal. But that's where it gets interesting. Ncuti is acting his face off, as he takes the ring and has to leave the room, Rogue following, but you could read into it that the Doctor has a genuine oh shit reaction to the proposal, as we do see him put on the back foot emotionally a couple times this episode. Many Cholder make it outside while Emily freaks out, and 15 and Rogue get to dash through the grounds from the Cholder family. It's a pretty tense scene that makes excellent use of the sets and misty night atmosphere. 15 and Rogue eventually shake the birds off, but the Cholder don't camouflage again, targeting Parliament and royalty, looking to end the world with their plays.
A little bit of Ziz.
15 changes the triform to take multiple targets, but it'll only work once. And back in the house, Emily learns the truth about 15 and Ruby, deciding to take Ruby's body as it's revealed she is the last Cholder. The main Cholder enter the main hall, taking the main nobles main hostage for their main wedding, and mean to murder them afterwards. But the bride and groom are revealed, Ruby one of them. 15 having to leave and take a second to cry, and since Church on Ruby Road, that's almost half the episodes 15 has cried in, and I get he's meant to be emotional and all that, but it really devalues the emotions of this usually kept together Time Lord. Think of 9, 10, 11, they rarely cried, but when you did, you fucking felt it. But now, every time Ruby gets hurt or things get sad, it just feels like Ncuti was good at on-the-spot crying, and they wrote it into as many scripts as they could. He even does it later again, which would have been far more impactful if it hadn't happened here. Another strange choice is that we now get a flashback between 15 and Carla, where he promises to keep Ruby safe on their adventures. And I just don't know why that's here. It's another point to make that shows why the 6-month time jump in Devil's Chord is fucking ridiculous. And it should have been the pre-finale. Because Ruby was shot multiple times in Boom, and 15 didn't have the flashback then. She was strung up and almost killed by Maestro, not then. That makes the whole issue with this season pacing. 2 Dr. Light episodes in an 8-episode season with a nonsensical timeline makes more problems than it solves. The Cholder start the wedding, murdering fools, so after 15 gets a great line...
Good. It's a long time to suffer.
He waltzes in and traps the bird folk, letting the rabble escape. 15 is pissed, but the Ruby there is an imposter. An imposter of the imposter. As in a flashback to what I think is the instrumentation of Poker Face by Lady Gaga,
It's Lady Gaga!
She activates battle mode on the earrings, beating the feathers off Emily, who comes in with a broken beak. 15 starts freaking out as he can't turn the gate off, but Rogue comes in, dropping Emily into the trap and trying to get him to activate it. It's a pretty good scene between the two as 15 struggles, so Rogue tries to save him by grabbing the trigger and switching himself with Ruby. He gets that kiss with 15, and the scene would have been better paced if this kiss was more spontaneous. Like I said, not having the tease from earlier and not having the crying earlier, which would make it more emotionally impactful. Outside as day breaks, 15 sends his ship into the moon's orbit to wait for Rogue. And I just had a thought that considering in Victory of the Daleks, that's where the Daleks were hiding, and that is probably, 150 years later, let's hope it's not left there for too long. Don't want the Daleks running into Rogue's ship, do we? But 15 doesn't know where the portal sent them. I'm attempting to laugh it off like always, but Ruby forcing him to come to terms with it. Which is good, but would work a lot better with a Doctor who, once again, isn't so emotional all the time. They have a final little dance as 15 tells her how much he missed her, and the episode finishes with him looking at the ring he took from Rogue and putting it on, before presumably leaving. So with the trailer for next week, and my top 3 options are Sutekh, Kronos, and I might be clowning, but the Trickster, considering there is a theory that this season is just the final season of Sarah Jane rejigged a bit, which is an interesting point to make and you should look up. And the episode ends with a send-off for the fantastic late and great William Russell, although oddly it doesn't appear on the Disney Plus version. And we must again wait another week. So that was Rogue, a pretty good showing, but once again not without issues. The romance between Rogue and 15, while a lot of it was well written and enhanced with their on-screen chemistry, there were what I felt were missteps, perhaps being too eager to get through as many TV relationship checkpoints as they could, not having the breathing room of multiple episodes, making bits feel rushed or not in their proper place. But I would like to see it explored more in some upcoming seasons. Rogue himself, the episode's namesake, was a very fun character, and as said before, played well by Jonathan Groff. Even if the character is just a watered-down version of Captain Jack, he's played well enough to be a character in his own right. Ruby didn't get that much to do beyond dialogue and being emotional leverage against 15. But Millie Gibson was still enjoyable, and while emotionally I think 15 could have used some tune-ups, Shruti was still putting in his all. The story wasn't amazing, but I like to think I can tell that Kate Herron and Bryony Redman put effort and passion into this Bridgerton-inspired episode. And it's just too bad we couldn't get, say, a Violet and Eloise cameo.
I cannot think of any cleverer way to say this, but no.
So I'll give episode 6 of Doctor Who Series 14, or Season 40 if you want to be funny, Rogue by Kate Herron and Bryony Redman, a solid 8 out of 10. Just between Boom and Dot and Bubble. I can't wait to see part 1 of the finale next week, and I suppose with the news of a new episode of Tales of the Tardis, we might get an extra video in the week after. Part 1 of the finale, The Legend of Ruby Sunday, and boy, do we have a lot to unpack here. An episode that brings the left narrative strands together, except for the memory TARDIS, that is, and I'm still a little shocked the episode managed to predict an audience theory and successfully subvert it. But once again, like the Toymaker reveal, they let slip a little too much detail. And some clever clocks figured it out. We even mentioned the big villain they reveal in a previous theorizing session, and they give mention to a theory us Sarah Jane fans had. We've had a few subpar or divisive showings this season, but this episode fits well as a part 1 to a finale. Usually I don't gel well with New Who part 1s. To me, every now and then they end up feeling just like setup, not really satisfying, making 1 week of Doctor Who viewing feel kinda shitty, waiting for the story to finish the next. Although Russell finales have had a pretty good track record with part 1s, Bad Wolf, Stolen Earth, Army of Ghosts, all bring something to explore. The Game Station, the Earthwide characters, and Torchwood 1. And this episode does that well of having enough content beyond setting up the finale, and doing a good job at that too. To keep you invested the whole time, not just waiting for the end to occur so you can be hyped for next week. To see if that sticks the landing, but that is for next week to see. For now, let's see if this part 1 stands on its own, and how it stands on its own, while still propping us up for next week. The episode opens with Unit getting ready for 15 as he swans in, spinning the TARDIS into HQ met by Rose Noble, a character who is far more tolerable this episode, her dialogue not geared to insult a whole gender or take potshots at the Doctor for the sake of it. Yeah, as time goes on, the nostalgia stops obfuscating how frustratingly some things were written in the Starbeast. She was written less of a real person and more of a strange mouthpiece for dialogue that could have easily been redone to keep the message and come across as natural without the frustration. A point that I made in my review of the Starbeast, which you can see quite easily as I just released a compilation video of my reviews of the 60th anniversary episodes and the Church on Ruby Road. So if you haven't seen those original reviews, why not check out that video after this one. 15 asks about 14, and we see the new Unit team as Ruby is introduced to them. Kate, having been a long-standing character, Ibrahim, the Vlinks, and Rose from the 60th, and new characters Maurice Gibbons, fun child prodigy with the cutest segue, apparently from an asteroid. The genius part, not the segue. Played by Lenny Rush, and Harriet, played by Genesis Lanier. It's a nice little scene where they all get some screen time, and 15 reveals why they're here. 15 has finally noticed the woman too many times, showing off her appearances, including 2 new cool designs as a Slugma and a Griffin. But Unit is already ahead of him, Morris and Kate with the shit-eating grin waiting for the penny to drop. We see the woman's current identity, Susan Triad, first mentioned in The Giggle, and with the reveal of S-Triad Tech, the Doctor makes the same deductions the audience has done the past 7 weeks. But once again, UNIT have noticed the whole TARDIS thing themselves, keeping tabs as Morris is pretty sure it's a trap. And it's nice to see UNIT on the ball for once, considering their last appearances in the Disney era have been so lackluster. Mind-controlled, smacked around and lasered while being mind-controlled, and then mind-controlled again.
The name is TARDIS technology.
Well, obviously. Thank you.
Even I got that.
Ruby notices she's called Susan, paying off the Devils Chord, and leaving us with a pretty good intro into the title sequence, as even if this isn't our Susan, it means the threat is big and clever enough to exploit this part of the Doctor's history. We get a rundown on who Susan Triad is and why UNIT was onto her, saying that they're on top of any evil genius with alien software except the obvious, about which Morris then mentions a him. I'm not too sure who they're referring to, but I'd assume the Master due to the organisation's history. But since the last time they ran into the Master it was Missy, that's a little confusing. So, who knows? Morris tells us that Susan is clean, while 15 has to give Ruby the rundown on regeneration, meaning he'll only know if it's Susan if he meets her face to face. As we've heard before, they should be able to notice who the other is once they meet, although it almost never works that way. And Morris is pretty sure that the probability of a trap is 95%. A nice running line of dialogue that gets paid off later quite well. We see that the broadcast is a test, to be properly broadcast later, as Mel is hidden in the media department, getting UNIT information, and it turns out Susan is just kind of a lovely person.
She's so lovely, she's so lovely.
And pretty down to earth as we see her and Mel talking. A hint to the reveal as she asks Mel to call her Sue. 15 mentions that since they have a mystery woman, we should discuss the other mystery woman, calling out Ruby like he's giving her a birthday surprise.
Ruby Sunday!
God, you're gonna warm me!
It's amazing, you look gorgeous.
Oh, it's my sister.
The other woman being her mother. We get a small rundown of the important points of Church on Ruby Road, Morris matching my reaction as the girls just start fucking talking about Davina McCall again. It's a weird unnecessary scene that feels more at home in an MCU or DC Joss Whedon movie than it does in Doctor Who. It's great that we have this ensemble cast, but the dialogue could be a little better when you want cute moments of interaction. As it is, this sidestep felt a bit strange. Morris thinks that both women that we don't know things about could be the same woman, while 15 tells us he doesn't want to head back to Ruby Road, already having been there, and too much going on like the snow thing to park the TARDIS there again. Harriet realises there could have been CCTV footage near the church, and Ruby reveals that she has a tape of what went on that night. That probably could have used a mention in Church on Ruby Road, as here, it kinda feels like Russell pulled this plot point out of his arse.
Out of my house and never come here again with this!
Another strange detail is that the camera was 66 metres away, almost 73 yards. Morris thinks they can sharpen the image on the tape, so Ruby and Rose, not to be confused with an actress I never enjoy, are escorted by Ibrahim back home. And I don't know if it's her heels, but Yasmin Finney is a fucking giant here. I swear she wasn't this tall in the 60th, or do you think Ruby and 15 are just that short? Rose mentions a place called Catford, a real place, but I think it's quite funny that the last place it was mentioned in Doctor Who was in the novelisation of Rose. Meanwhile, Mel uses the most conspicuous device to shake hands with Susan, while Susan gives us a rundown of her life in the same way John Smith used to do under the Chameleon Arch. Although I'm not sure if it's like that, some sort of hint to Susan Triad not being a real personality, or if it's just Russell's lazy writing. Carla returns and has a nice scene retrieving the tape with Ruby, strangely saying the episode title, and she isn't the only one who says it this episode. It's a strange episode title considering Ruby herself takes a bit of a back seat, past the whole time window thing. Rose needs to get a different coat. Seriously, she looks like she's about to flash someone. Coats like that, and in that colour, never look good closed. Castiel always had the good sense to keep it open, so it never looked like that angel was about to flash us with his divine light. Carla decides to come to Unit Tower, getting Mrs. Flood to look after Cherry while they're gone, the radio flickering as she enters, and her scaring Cherry once the others leave.
He waits no more.
You better not hurt her, Flood. If Cherry doesn't get out of this unscathed, I will cause a riot.
And I will descend.
And this is where the tension starts building. With a nice shot, Kate talks to 15 about the brig and asks about Susan. 15 saying that he has Susan, but hasn't had her kids yet. Which is weird because it was Russell's error that cemented in New Who that the Doctor was a father. So while you can justify it as he had kids but not Susan's parent, the audience shouldn't have to think that up to save Russell's continuity errors. 15 says he won't go back to see Susan, afraid he'll ruin her. A justifiable answer considering what happened the last time he ran into her.
Why didn't you do the universe a favour and jump right into that time warp yourself? Huh? Because then, just about then, I might be prepared to even entertain the remotest possibility of I can't even bring myself to say that. Get out of my sight.
Doctor,
Go!
It's a lovely scene between Kate and the Doctor, and Morris updates us to a 96% chance of a trap. And Mel comes in, 15 and her getting a nice little reunion. Her updating us that Susan is totally human. Kate correct in guessing that she may be a chrysalis. She's human for now, but will be evil later. Kate also refuses to let Carla in, so 15 lets her in with a great reaction from Kate.
Yeah, but it's Carla. Come on.
Carla Sunday. Access granted.
Right. Fine, thanks.
It's also nice to see another colour of screwdriver. I'm really digging the yellow colour 15's got this episode. 15 asks Kate if they have a time window, knowing full well they do, giving Kate another good reaction. And we head down to the time window, mostly controlled by Morris. And the set is quite good, like a modern-day Star Trek holodeck. Which may be a thing, but considering the last Star Trek I actually watched was Voyager, I have no idea if they look like that now. 15 quite literally laughs at Unit, thinking the design is shoddy compared to what he's used to, which is a good comedy bit. And we meet Internal Security, Colonel Winston Chidoze. The only other guy that will be in there with them, and he's pretty nice, having some things in common with Ruby, so he's totally doomed to die. 15 reckons the data on the VHS is enough extra detail to give them a good look at what happened on Ruby Road. We see the VHS is pretty shitty, Carla finally making it in as they power up. 15 and Ruby alone in the time window, except for the Colonel of course, while Mel keeps Carla cool. 15 and Ruby have a nice little talk, the emotions and snow seeming to help the time window along, shocking everyone, giving us some nice cinematography, and a nice line from Morris.
That's impossible. I'll tell you what's impossible. Haven't turned it on yet.
The effects of the time window starting are pretty great as the perspective shifts, like a holographic version of the volume. Morris is being cheeky again and we hear Carol of the Bells start, as 15 recaps us what happened that night. The woman seems to be purposefully shadowed to not allow us or Ruby to see her face, only Carla getting the briefest look to see her crying. And Carla then speaking out to tell the woman that Ruby is safe and loved. It's a great idea, pulled off well by Michelle Greenidge. 15 has a line that probably sets up Tales of the Tardis.
That Tardis is almost solid. If time is memory and memory is time, then what is the memory of a time machine?
And Ruby gets to have a nice emotional scene with the hooded figure before she starts pointing. The Colonel aiming his gun and heading in the direction of the finger, seeing nothing. But going behind the TARDIS in such a way, it's obvious something bad will happen. Seriously, that could have been so much better. 15 tries to figure it out, but Mel points out the woman is leaving, the figure disappearing, and everyone feeling awkward as Ruby cries. 15 leaves in the past, but a great black and red shadow monster appears, and it looks pretty good, really intimidating. The Colonel has been engulfed, but with enough prodding, they hear his voice, spouting off really creepy speeches. Morris does a good job of getting us afraid.
It's off the scale. That thing is hot, it's cold, it's radioactive, it's dead, it's everything. I don't know.
And for some reason, Carla thinks it's called the Beast, which, you know, makes me think of...
Son of the great beast, cast out before time, chained in rock and imprisoned beneath the rift. What?
But that was a bit of a misdirect, just a strange line from Carla. The Colonel claims he's in hell, telling us quite clearly this is the thing that waits, going to a crescendo with the time window exploding, impressively cutting into the viewing window. And all that is left in the wake of the shadow is the Colonel, reduced to sand, And with the Doctor apologising, Kate just gives him this look, and wow! The way Gemma Redgrave gets the character across in just a glare is why I love having Kate around so much. She's like, I know it's not your fault my employee's dead, but I'm pissed now, and I'm trying not to lash out. She gets even more desperate to keep her people alive later. And after the way the Toymaker utterly wrecked them last time, it's understandable. 15 decides to go with Mel to the Triad filming and takes his anger out on a poor elevator. And Mel, being the one to get him off his ass after his pity party, makes a lot of sense. Six's best companions, Mel, Constance and Evelyn, are the ones who can put him in his place when need be. And while Mel didn't really get that characterization on TV, while travelling with him except for making him exercise and drink carrot juice, after her time with Glitz, seen in The Giggle and in expanded media like A Life in Crime, this makes sense for a character to do after all those many years. According to Kate, the being was so strong it got burned into the VHS itself, only able to be scanned properly when reversed later. 15 now gets the chance to meet Susan, who he doesn't seem to think is our Susan. But she won't be stopped going on to broadcast, and this scene is great. You really get to see why they hired her apart from her name being Susan Twist. When she offhandedly brings up her sleeplessness and 15 starts bringing up her appearances, you see the look on her face. It's fantastic as she gets scared and makes her way onto the stage.
Do you dream about being an ambulance?
This is an ambulance!
And back at Unit, they run the tape backwards and see the TARDIS within the shadow, there for a second time. And we hear the TARDIS groan again, a thing it's been doing since it landed in Wild Blue Yonder. I suppose Donna's coffee was enough to allow the thing to hitch on board. Pretty clever hinting, as the TARDIS also made these noises in The Devils Chord and Rogue. Many people like me rightly predicting the TARDIS would play a part in the finale. Morris also gets to pay off his lines from before here.
Probability of a trap, 99% and rising, except the trap is here.
They scan the TARDIS, now showing that the thing is here now, and evacuate the area, but 15 is too curious to leave. Susan bumbles onto stage, doing a little dance for some reason, and the tonal change is a bit off-putting, going from danger to silly dancing to danger, leading Ruby to kick Carla out while the Vlinx scans the entity. Shit starts going wrong, the TARDIS getting sicker and Unit's power going out, and a creepy voice taking Susan over, as she starts having a bit of a freak-out. 15 and Kate order Ruby to the time window, as Kate announces herself to the entity, but Harriet starts chanting, very creepily. It's written really well, telling us the entity has seduced the vessel, but whether it means it has control of the TARDIS or Susan is up for debate. She continues insulting the Doctor, and we get her reveal. Her name is Harriet Arbinger. But whether she is Maestro's child, Harbinger, or if this entity has its own child, Harbinger, is unknown. But it's a pretty good reveal. Susan and the teleprompter get worse as the Master's theme starts playing for some reason, while Ruby and the Unit soldier get shut into the time window by some other force as it remembers Christmas Eve. Kate orders Ibrahim away, refusing to let her people near the danger, and we get a good mention of the gods as Susan falls to her knees. Seriously, a mention of Maestro, the Toymaker, the Trickster, the Mara, and more? The name dropping cool on its own, but also gearing us well for a similar level threat. The shadow reveals itself and claims itself the mother, father, and other of them all, which may be a nice unintentional reference to the Time Lord founders, Rassilon, Omega, and the Other. The creature reveals itself as the god of all gods, Set, Seth, and Sutek.
You mean Sutek is still alive?
The glitching on the screen and the teleprompter very creepy, and the CGI beast, along with what looks like makeup and CG on Harbinger and Susan, is very well done, and creepy as well. We hear Gabriel Wolf talk as Sutek again, which is awesome, and quoting the original Sutek story, it all culminating in a pretty epic and good-looking finale. Ruby's mum approaching her, and the Doctor so shocked it looks like he's deep-throating Ghost Dick. Seriously, Ncuti has been decent this episode, but needs to work on his shocked face. It looks ridiculous. And that is how this week's episode ends. And yeah, it was pretty good. Like I said, there are ways for pre-finales to fail, and just be the boring part one you have to get through every watch. But we have enough character interactions, great acting, and the moments in the time window to make this both a good time in its own right, and a good build-up for the finale. even if it does more better as a lead up than on its own. But that's what I expected. The whole ending scene is grandiose and looks great on a set, direction and effects level. Susan looking surprisingly chilling, and the CGI Sutek looking great in both forms. It's great to have Gabriel Wolf back. He's such a good voice for the character, the God of Gods, who influenced humanity so much they built a religion around him. Or at least that's how I remember his story, being one of the Osirans. But his power was supposed to be so great, it makes sense that he could be retconned into the God of Death, and perhaps created the Osirans in his image? Perhaps Part 2 or Big Finish may touch upon how that works. But it's been hinted at from the start, with all these colours in the promo material, hinting to that rainbow time tunnel I remember from Pyramids of Mars. Although I am a little disappointed that they don't make the distinction between Death and the God of Death. One is a dog man, the other is a hot chick. Keep up with your wilderness lore, Russell. A strange through line considering Death's sister, Time, took 13's form to speak to her at the end of Flux. Ruby was pretty good here, you'd hope so since she's the emotional crux, but I still think if we had gotten more episodes the payoff would be felt better. And Carla is great for most of the time, even if the way she's written and shot in the story can feel awkward or half-baked at points. And 15 has the same problems in performance as usual, but at least he didn't cry 3 times. They're saving the tears for the finale. The surrounding cast was great as well on the whole. Rose didn't get any brain-dead lines, except for her, Ruby and Kate talking about Davina McCall for some reason. Kate was good as well, getting great emotional moments, but also a few funny or more down-to-earth moments she's rarely gotten since her arrival in The Power of Three. Morris was the new character I loved, although it's strange that each of the latest scientific advisors had a, not disability per se, but Osgood needed her inhaler, Shirley her wheelchair, and Morris his Segway. I don't know. The Mrs. Flood and Cherry Sunday scene was probably the only standout odd moment when nothing really progresses. Cherry is seemingly in danger and all Mrs. Flood did was indicate some bad shit's coming. It felt a little out of place since I'm not sure we're getting her payoff next episode. So in conclusion, looking at the past rankings, I'll have to give The Legend of Ruby Sunday by Russell T Davies, part 1 of the series finale, a solid 7.5. I'd give it more, but it's inherently half a story. So while there are great moments and the ending was amazing, I can't rate it too high, as the real meat will be in next week's episode. But if that one's as good as this, I think it's going to be a solid finale. Even if I can't justify raising the score as an episode, if I was rating it for what it is, half an episode, a lead-up, as a lead-up, I'd give it between an 8 and 9, but I'm rating it as a 7.5 on the same mental criteria as the past episodes.
There's always a twist, there's always a twist, there's always a twist at the end.
15 and Mel evacuate the studio while Susan summons a new power of Sutek's, the Dust of Death. What a creative name. Spreading out like sand and killing everyone in its path. Amounting so high it starts running through the city. And back at Unit, after everyone but Rose, who's just kind of standing there poking at a tablet, you know, while the child on a Segway is using machine guns, Harriet brings the dusts as well, killing the Vlinks and everyone else, Kate getting a nice little moment, but it's also a little stupid. She goes on about birds, and I have no idea what that means in relation to either her character or this story.
Personally, I think that's a hell of a bird.
As Mel and 15 make their way to Unit through some rough dialogue, we get some pretty effective scenes of chaos on the streets as the dust makes its way, killing everyone like a wave, which we also see from Carla's car and with Cherry. Flood gets another cryptic line to scare Cherry, both dying, so we can assume that Flood isn't a being with enough power to withstand Sutek. But the real issue here is that Cherry died. Why not let her be in the rest of the episode? She could toddle along with the rest of the cast to the future and make Sutek get her a cup of tea.
I would love a cup of tea.
Die at the hand of Sutek.
I have such plans.
15 and Mel make it to the time window, the Doctor sending her escort off into a bunker that is most likely not safe from a god, instead of taking her with them. And he runs into the memory TARDIS, the TARDIS from the time window, and it's the same memory TARDIS we've had run-ins in with Tales of the TARDIS. Although how 15 is standing so directly in the centre when the little diorama of 13's console should be right at his feet, I have no idea. He sonics off the TV screen playing the VHS tape, somehow still playing when it's removed, on this old-looking TV, so it's really lucky that the makers of this old television thought ahead to allow the screen to be taken out like a switch, while still having a connection to the VHS player and an internal power source to make it portable. What? To power the memory TARDIS, 15 doubles down on his thinking last time, using Ruby's memories to make it fully corporeal. Which is a nice sentiment, but I prefer the grand brilliance of the speculation that the other Doctors put in to explain its existence in Tales of the TARDIS. Sutekh comes with the TARDIS and Harriet, landing to mock 15, calling him the greatest monster 15's ever fought, which, you know, you could probably come up with a better one, but I suppose it fits since he didn't really defeat him at all, he just kinda let him be in the vortex to waste away, but sure. In a welcome surprise, we hear Sarah's voice from the screen as it plays old clips, recently re-edited and scaled from Sutekh's last story, for Tales of the TARDIS. And it's nice to see, but what kind of sense does it make? I'm sure you could say that the time window is drawing on his thoughts, of course being about Sutekh, but later on, it starts giving hints and dropping events hinted at in 73 yards, so yeah, I guess there's a connection at least, but are we supposed to believe that this time window or maybe even the memory TARDIS are going around dropping hints to save the universe? It's a fine idea, but not really thought out or demonstrated. 15 gives us the blurb of that adventure for anyone who didn't see that story, and Sutekh exposits how he escaped by finding the TARDIS at some point in the vortex and hitching a lift. He says,
I have travelled with you for all this time, riding the spine of your ship.
So, was he there since the beginning? That means every time there's been multiple TARDISes, there have been multiple Sutekhs, and that when the 4th, 7th, and 10th Doctors ran into him, that he just kinda sat there and watched the Doctor fuck him up every time. But at least we get an explanation on how he looks like he does now, as he has amassed more power and evolved into the God of Death, going from super powerful arsehole Siren with a god complex, to what the universe actually considers a godlike being. Thankfully not retconning everything we know about the Osirans as many were worried would happen. Sutekh and Harriet have full TARDIS control, turning the TARDIS and hugging it like he's trying to poke his schlong through the doors or something. And explains that that's how he got Susan's name, not the schlong thing, but sitting atop the TARDIS and infesting it the whole time. And we get a little colour video of Susan, which I'm not sure what it's from, but if it's from the coloration of the Daleks, that's just kind of lazy. Plus another little explanation of the whole anagram thing, which, thank you, I'm sure we all forgot that from last week, but also it feels a little weird just flashing that old clip on the screen like it's a flashback, trying to repeat what they did in the giggle, which was still really strange, but much better done. Sutekh made a Susan triad wherever they went, the screen showing us many clips from the show, including the Death Zone, what looks like Paradise Towers, and New Year's Eve from the movie, and strangely what looks like a town called Mercy. Each Susan killing everything around them with the sands, just like how the Earth is dying now, killing whole planets simultaneously in different times. Unlike in Dot and Bubble, when 15 starts damning Sutekh, I don't really feel the gravitas, and I'm pretty sure he's crying again. It's a good speech, but once again, doesn't have enough power behind the speech. And like I said in Rogue, if he cries every time emotions aren't base level, it starts to become funnier than it does heavily emotional. And because of the overuse, it undercuts many emotional scenes in this episode, and they could have been saved to make a much bigger impact. 15 asks the good question, why aren't they all dead yet? But Sutekh just growls. And 15 finally gets a good line in, mocking Sutekh, that the God of Death must feel so alive. And they run into the memory TARDIS to retreat, having to repair it as they fly off planet. Mel getting to reunite with the ghastly coat. And we of course get to see a bunch of nostalgia items while they try and keep the TARDIS together. 15 finds a bungee rope, which is apparently a molecular bond, and he finds the intelligent gloves from the church on Ruby Road. We establish that the Susans are real people, but brought into being with the TARDIS perception filter, fitting in, and it extends exactly 73 yards, which I guess is Russell's desperate attempt to convince us that that episode ended up meaning anything, and wasn't a failing at what could have been a 10 out of 10 episode. 15 opens the doors and sees that Australia is the last to go, as the planet is killed. Ruby, Mel and 15 having a nice little emotional scene, even if Mel does little. 15 closes the doors with a nice mix of new and old sound effects, and 15 shows us on the screens a whole bunch of planets from previous stories, like Telos, Khan, and Skaro, are dying the same way. We get a nice little visual of the universe dying, seeing a star go out, even though there seems to be a perfectly good one behind them, and 15 starts crying and screaming as he blames himself for it. And we weirdly fade to black. Once again, a scene undercut by the performance. If it were 12 or 10 screaming anger, maybe even 13, and I had issues with the way Jodie played the character, then I'd probably still feel it. But Shitty brought that angry old legend performance once in Dot and Bubble, and just fucking abandoned it. Boy, I am not really enjoying this episode, am I? Already 17 minutes in and I've got more complaints about it than Ian Levine has about perfectly sane people.
Yeah, right, lads, I just got my Celestial Toymaker Blu-ray. And do you know what? I think Ian Levine might have a point. Because, I mean, that's not on, is it? You can't be putting that on the cover art. It's terrible.
Sutek gets Susan a robe and he's angry that he doesn't know Ruby's mother. What? Like, I get it thematically, the power of the mystery, but I just don't really get why the god of death is so invested. Like, she's probably dead anyway. Why are you only double checking now? He probably has no idea Sarah Jane's dead, but he's not out there looking for her or anything. I think they mention a reason for him to do this later on, so I guess we'll come back to this argument then. On a desolate planet, 15 comes across a kind woman, who I believe is played by Sean Clifford. The whole scene is nice, but it feels like it goes on a little too long, and ends in the woman giving 15 a spoon because he needs metal. But the woman's point of view is really interesting. I thought it was going to be cheap since she shushes a baby that doesn't make any noise, but she gives us a nice demonstration of how memory itself seems to be dying along with everything else, as she recalls a man telling her things about the entropy wave. Her realizing that her baby was killed a fair while ago, and eventually, after giving 15 the metal, she fades away too. The baby reveal took balls and was actually quite shocking. Sean pulled it off well, and by now I think I should bring up that at 15 cries counter, as he does it again. Once again, it makes me feel shitty and trivial to criticize a guy crying, but you compare this emotional performance to any other Doctor that comes before, and you see that every time they cry is for maximum emotional effect. But in this series is made to feel as cheap and tacky as putting a tie around someone's head to visually convey they're drunk or hungover. Using the metal, 15 watches Pyramids of Mars, as the wave is starting to get to Mel, as she sits next to what I think is Dorium's head box. The time window starts responding to Ruby apparently, allowing her hints. And 15 explains that when Sutek landed at the Church of Ruby Road, not telling us if he means when he saved the baby or when Sutek apparently landed for a second time, as we seem to have forgot that happened, apparently Sutek's ego is just too big, trying to figure out the mystery of the woman, because the mystery is driving Ruby and 15 nuts, so his ego needs to know the answer. Well, that's kinda fucking dumb.
Oh, well, that's all right then!
Sutek starts taking over Mel, wanting eyes in the Tardis, and the time window shows Ruby Roger Ap Gwilliam again, showing what looks like a deleted scene from 73 Yards, as he goes on about compulsory DNA testing and recordings he put in place. A way for 15 and Ruby to find her mother, as everyone in that time was recorded. 15 taking the TARDIS into 2046 to take a look, picking up a whistle he finds and keeping it because he likes it. I hope it doesn't, for no discernible reason at all, become a key component in defeating Sutek. Ooh. Interestingly enough, we are told how Sutek is exerting control over Mel, using the whole bunch of dead cells we have on and within us at any given point to possess her. A good idea, and good in the story because she really hasn't had very much to do. 15 and Ruby have a costume change, and they make their way into the Department of Health. 15 placing the screen on some sort of computer interface, and it perfectly syncing up and hanging there? Fuck off. Really, what bullshit kind of sense does that make? This episode is starting to really bug me. 15 grabs Mel's hand, asking her to look out, so she goes into the hallway to have a bit of a well-shot and decently performed possession freakout. 15 uses the Sonic, interestingly, to take Ruby's DNA and tap it into the system, giving us more Snow and Carol of the Bells. Another fairly underexplained thing. And once the match is made, Mel, fully possessed, brings them back to unit. It's on that cliffhanger we'll head into Tales of the Tardis, as that only has Ruby and 15 in it, which you would think makes it take place after Mel betrays them, but they aren't left alone for long enough for something like that to happen, so fuck me, I guess. We won't go all the way into Pyramids of Mars, the cuts, edits, and effects done, even if some of those choices are frustrating, and we'll just focus on the scenes between the characters. 15 and Ruby start talking and expositing the setup, in which we get a great mention of Sarah, and with what looks like a New Egypt shot. 15 starts going full storyteller mode, which is nice considering thanks to 13's console it looks like they're telling stories around the campfire. Although seeing the old Sutek design, I am a little pissed it didn't make a return this episode, even if the big CGI beast looks pretty good. Ruby watches 15 despair at Sutek's survival, while she does well to give us and 15 hope of beating the god. 15 also once again telling us that Sutek has evolved since the last encounter, ending the episode as he asks what he can do to stop Sutek. So that was probably the worst Tales of the Tardis episode, and while it is a good medium to give a newer viewer a look into the past, it doesn't really fit anywhere, as due to the dialogue it seems to take place within Empire of Death, but due to the lack of Mel and the clothing change, can't really be so. A nice little thing, but it could have been better, and an iota of thought could have been given into how it actually fit into the story. Back in Empire of Death, they arrive at the dead unit base, a hooded Mel taking her place beside Susan. They really like their robes this episode. Sutek is pretty eager to learn the name, even torturing 15 as he tries to talk his way out of it, and Millie gives us a pretty emotional performance before the scene goes utterly mental. She drops the screen to stop him seeing, pulls the molecular bond rope from out of her arse, after we were given no indication she took it from the memory TARDIS, hooking it around Sutek's neck like a leash, which is pretty funny considering how canine he is, and they use the smart gloves to pull him to heal, which, okay, plausible. What isn't is that somehow after 15 figured Mel out, by how cold she was, and somehow they got the rope and gloves from the TARDIS, then did they change their clothes and reminisce about Pyramids of Mars only to change back and come back with the rope and gloves for Mel to threaten them? 15 uses his whistle to engage a TARDIS internal thruster and shoot its way from the god's grasp and killing Harriet, because I suppose Sutek's influence only works if he's literally grabbing hold of the TARDIS. And the TARDIS shoots out, ramming into the attacking Mel and Susan, allowing 15 and Ruby to drag the molecular rope into the TARDIS, hooking Sutek on the inside and pulling him into the vortex. Visually, really good, but if you spend more than a second thinking about it, you realise Russell must have looked like this guy when he wrote it. What a load of bullshit. Do I even have to say everything wrong here? Sutek's apparently only powerful if he can hold on to the TARDIS like Gollum or Larfleeze. 15 can now pilot the TARDIS that's supposed to be under the powerful being's control with a whistle, and a rope and gloves can detain the god of death because I guess he's just got that dog in him. Ugh. They enter the vortex, and visually, this is fucking stunning. The TARDIS pulling Sutek through the vortex is beautiful, seriously. It looks fantastic, a nice mix of current vortex and giving Moffat vibes with the lightning. 15 starts screaming at Sutek, his performance suddenly getting better again, as Sutek starts ripping holes in the vortex, apparently that bringing death to death, using his own power against himself to bring life, which is a clever idea, but we don't really see any indication of how this works. Apparently Sutek ripping the vortex is just what does it, as we all see the dead people waking up in what is a pretty good scene emotionally, but grinds the pacing to a halt. This could have all been done once Sutek was actually dealt with. But we take the time to celebrate, everyone being alive again, even Cherry and Flood happy. Kate holding Ibrahim's hand, ooh, and 15 taking the time in a good moment to show us all the planets coming back, including the Ood sphere, taking a moment with Ruby to show the planet they were on before, now filled with life as the kind woman is playing with her definitely alive child. Like I said, these are all wonderful moments, but Sutek is still out there being dragged this whole time, so I really think the pacing would be much better if the upcoming scene where he dies was first, and then we got to see all this stuff. 15 goes back, and is this the first time we've seen the underside of the old girl like this? That's interesting. Anyway, 15 gets one final monologue, damning Sutek for making him his opposite. representing life but making 15 angry, as Sutek in his actions and in wasting away in the vortex makes 15 the bringer of his death. Very nice thematically, very clunky in dialogue execution. Unit have a pizza party, and we get some more good acting from Susan Twist, showing that she is a real person, and Kate wants to hire her, as Susan wants to help. With some nice banter. Good on Kate for hiring someone who isn't a child. Carla tells us what happened with her and Cherry, and thanks the doctor for saving them. Kate seemingly a little traumatized, but okay. Unit somehow retrieves the DNA information, and we find Ruby's mum, a woman who at first glance I thought was Sheridan Smith, which would have been really strange considering. Louise Miller. Oh, there could be a relation to Lucy Miller. Pregnant at age 15, was in a terrible home, and gave Ruby up to give them both the best opportunity. 15 telling us that the reason she was able to duck Sutek is because she was ordinary. The significance of her only relying upon their insistence of the idea of her. Once again, a very good moral the show has used before, but with a clunky execution. But better than a fair few things in this episode. They also bring up the whole pointing thing again. And it turns out that the 15-year-old was naming Ruby by pointing at the Ruby Road sign. Do I even... Okay, one more time. Good heart, absolute shit execution. Russell, what the fuck happened to you? So, after that goddamn mess, they stalk Louise and Ruby finds her in a coffee shop. After 15 kind of tries to talk her out of seeing her for some reason. And while the scene is kind of awkward, it's very nice and performed well. As Ruby can't manage to find the words in the beginning, just staring, but once the barista calls out her name for a drink, Louise notices, and they have a tearful reunion. It's lovely, but I can't help but thinking the barista is seeing this tearful reunion, still holding Ruby's coffee, waiting for her to grab it. Louise comes home with her and they spend time together. And I like that there's no unnecessary drama, no conflict with Carla like I know lesser dramas would. But because of all this, 15 knows it's better if Ruby leaves. Them hugging and saying goodbye to each other. Ruby telling him,
"Fuck off."
And 15 not answering, just crying at the console. See, imagine if this scene was one of, say, 3 times he cried this season, at the very most. What emotional impact that moment would have had after Ruby jabs at him, saying he better not pull what he did to Susan, and actually not come back to see her. It's a pretty good scene for both their characters as the family come to hold Ruby as 15 departs, ending the episode with narration by a White Guardian and Romana 1 coded Mrs. Flood. She tells us 15 is going to die, because of course he will, leading us into Christmas and Season 2, or Series 15, or Season 41. But also teasing us with one of the last remaining plot threads not answered, as she calls this the end of the story of the church on Ruby Road. And boy, if that was the theme you were going for, you kinda fucked up. This whole season being the story of the church on Ruby Road does not work in an episodic show like this. Maybe if it was shorter, if you only watched, say, Church on Ruby Road, Devils Chord, 73 Yards, and then the finale, it might work like that. But unless you're doing Flux again, and please don't do Flux again, don't try and wrap up the season as if every single episode in detail added to a grand storyline. So that was Empire of Death, and boy was I let down. I liked a lot in the episode, the ideas, the visuals were fantastic, but the writing, the performances, even the pacing and editing all had a lot of strange holes in them. Ruby and Sutek were oddly the best characters, Millie and Gabriel's performances being quite good. Even if the story revolving around them was a bit naff, the characters were good to watch. The way Tales of the Tardis was integrated was lazy and illogical, and I guess Mel being possessed could have been great if more focus was put on her. Seriously, why didn't the finale have an extended runtime? The episode tries multiple times to make 73 Yards relevant again, an episode that annoyed me not just because it was unfocused and led nowhere, but because I was hoping it was going to be one of the best of the season, when the good ideas it had were just kind of mashed together and not satisfying in the end. There was that great scene with the kind woman that paid off well, and in the final battle, while visually amazing, even if it did slightly copy its homework from Spider-Man No Way Home, was disjointed pacing-wise. And while the themes and powers behind 15 and Sutek were very interesting, they were not communicated to the audience in the best way. 15's speech and the explanation as to how everyone came back feeling like utter gobbledygook. I was also disappointed by all the minor characters not doing shit. The unit team were killed with terrible last words, but the episode does manage to land its feet in giving us a good resolution to Ruby's family drama, with good themes and a great performance, even if the show is insistent it uses that lovely, down-to-earth moment to make sure you don't forget about Flood and what's coming next season, with nary a next time trailer. So, while I don't think this episode was terrible, it disappointed me immensely. And I'll have to give it one of the lowest scores of the season, a 5.5 out of 10. Good visuals, a couple of great scenes, but there's so much it fails to do and left me feeling pretty empty by the end that I just can't justify a higher ranking. Speaking of higher rankings, unfortunately comparing this to Space Babies, an episode I had very similar problems with, I'll keep that one where it is, as I've already lowered the rating before, and it doesn't have the baggage of Sutek and story arcs. But I will say, I would rather re-watch this episode than Space Babies.
Toast. A little piece of toast. Because there's so much to choose from. There's brown bread, white bread, all sorts of wholemeal bread. It comes in funny packages with writing on the side.